Why did that teacher get fired from your school? He got a female student pregnant at the same time his wife was pregnant. His wife was and still is a gym teacher at the school. High school gym teacher. Apparently he showed up to a hotel room expecting to bang a 13-year-old but got busted by the cops instead. It's always the gym teacher. Middle school pay teacher walked into the girls' wardrobe and asked if he could watch one of them change their tampon as a joke. Yikes. She embezzled thousands of dollars from various club funds. There were also rumors of her sleeping with students, but the administration never bothered to look into that. Money is much more important than student safety. Arrested by the FBI for credit card fraud. It was a few months after the arrest when the reason why he disappeared came out in the open. After some of the others, I'm actually okay with yours. Dating a 16-year-old student. He was a band teacher. He also had a wife and kid. He went to jail and is now a registered sex offender. The state of Florida has asked us to explained elasticity by pulling the bra strap of a girl. Another one for having relationship with a girl from 8th grade. 14 yo. Hey Susie, come here so I can explain the female reproduction to the class. Our new band teacher was a young guy, fresh out of college. His first year teaching and he embezzled about $1,000 from the band's funds. He got arrested and his possible future career ruined for $1,000. I had a teacher with a gambling addiction claim thousands of dollars collected under his care was lost, but school never reported it in and protected him because he was close to retirement. Oh boy, where to start? Elementary school nurse was fired for taking the kids' medications. HS band teacher slept with a 15-year-old. Swim coach left a hotel that he was at with his mistress drunk and killed someone with his car. My high school had like 400 students. One of the elementary school teachers at the district I went to got arrested for making his class worship him like he was a cult leader. He was totally bonkers. I had a football coach like that. He made us call him God. I signed out of the team pretty quickly. He didn't come to parent-teacher interview night. The next day, he was late for class and crashed his pickup into a brick sign outside the school. Cops showed up obviously and allegedly he blew twice the legal limit. He called the principal a C as he was taken away. He called the principal a C as he was taken away. Just while he was at it, might as well vent some grudges. Coach history teacher of course. First off, some of the early warning signs we all should have noticed first. He showed up the first day of school and told us he was a youth minister and that we would always see him in long sleeves and pants because he had tattoos and he regrets them. That he didn't want to accidentally encourage any of us to get some too. 2 weeks later he is in shorts and polo shirts showing off multiple Looney Tunes tattoos. He taught 6th grade US history out of a textbook. Word for word. We did multiple chapters a day and were expected to do every assignment listed for each chapter. This averaged about 3 hours of work a day. In 6th grade, he was the only class that year to regularly assign homework and he received multiple parent complaints about the workload. He would often leave the class alone to read chapters. He would then go out to the hall or parking lot to make out with his girlfriend who would arrive randomly. He was the middle school track coach and thus spent a lot of time in and around the middle school locker rooms. Too much time. He took photos of the kids running for the yearbook. These pictures eventually made it onto his work computer desktop. Then his phone background. Only the girls though. But the final straw that got us out of his care. He showed up to a middle school basketball game drunk and tried to yell at the ref. He was fired that day and not allowed back on campus. Youth minister. Track coach. Each one is a warning sign. Both as a confirmation. My math teacher was a volunteer first responder. In NY, she left school to help out during 9/11 and was fired for not showing back up for 2 weeks. Freaking heck. Wasn't a teacher but our vice principal. Essentially our principal bumped her twin niece's class ranks up to valedictorian and salutatorian. The vice principal, one of the nicest guys I've ever met and a truly amazing guy, did what was right and confronted the school board and told them that this was unfair to those who actually earned those ranks. Those twins were some of the most average people I've ever encountered in my life, and they didn't work nearly as hard as the other candidates for the spot. It doesn't help that everyone on the school board, including the superintendent, was related to the principal. Thus, our heroic vice principal was fired, and it was a shock to the whole school. They tried covering it up by saying he didn't have the proper documentation education to be in his position. Though if that was the case, I'm not sure why they would hire him and let him stay for the first 2 years of my high school career. Everyone knew it was a sham, and the local news actually got involved when I called them during lunch. That next football game, NBC showed up and there was a protest outside of the local library. I printed out almost 100 flyers that read, "What are you gonna do? Fire me? Save Lightfoot." The entire school was pee, and the twins' ranks were promptly demoted back to 21st and 22nd in our class, though not until the next school year started. It's insane how corrupt school systems are nowadays. She had fallen off the wagon and was drinking a lot to the point where it was affecting her memory. We kept doing the same lecture on density in 6th grade science for a month, until one of my classmates decided to ask another teacher about it. From there she went to rehab. If anyone wants more context, she was our homeroom and science teacher. She was very nice and married to our assistant principal, so she had a little bit more leeway. While she was able to remain sober for a while, she eventually passed away due to the effects of her addiction a few years after this. She never seemed like a bad teacher, but she was always stressed to the absolute maximum, always felt like she was working from behind, and generally struggling to keep up. You know, the traditional tail end of the functioning addict lifestyle, affecting rather than affecting. That may have been one of the lessons I missed. Your knowledge on density must be phenomenal. Geeky AV teacher that everyone loved, knew he was a geek and owned it. Caught in a predator sting trying to solicit underage girls. The kicker was a spring school levy was coming up. Local police conspired with the school district to hide the charges for 3 weeks until the levy was passed. Someone substituted his class for 3 weeks. Yeah, everyone was both devastated and the district ended the school year early. He straight up didn't show up to work one Monday, didn't call in to arrange a sub or anything. He ghosted the school for a whole week and then tried to come in the following Monday like nothing happened. We also had a 5th grade teacher overdose on M, but I honestly don't know if she got fired or resigned. It didn't happen at school. My grade 2 teacher also got fired for not showing up. She did at least make plans for a sub most of the time, but we went weeks without seeing her. He was caught trying to solicit a child prostitute during a sex trafficking sting. He was a social studies teacher at my middle school, and the arrest made local news when I was a freshman. Really shocked the district. This sounds like my middle school's Mr. Leonard. He was a total pedophile. When one girl ran out of his class crying because he grabbed her butt, she reported him and he got fired. But then so many parents complained because they loved him that the school brought him back. It was a whole ridiculous situation. My AP Chem teacher had an affair with the principal. Principal got fired too. I felt bad for her. They didn't do anything on school property, and it didn't impact her performance in the classroom. Also, the school wasn't able to find a qualified teacher to replace her halfway through the year, so we were all fricked come test time at the end of the year. Not one of us passed that AP test. That's messed up. There are very few teachers in a given school that are capable of teaching AP, especially without training. Dating a 16-year-old female student. He was also a PE teacher. It's always the PE teachers. I heard a rumor that my favorite teacher from 9th grade got fired when I was in 10th grade because he left his class unattended. Honestly, amid all the pedophilia and rampant alcoholism, I like the anticlimax of this one. One was such an unlikable teacher they were asked to retire. One was watching PE in class. One sent someone else's dong pics to a student's mom. One robbed a bank. This one is actually sort of rather sad. Had an amazing, but eccentric, math teacher who was incredibly involved with helping students. He made sure to always cover his bases, so there was nothing really creepy about him. The year I left high school, was a senior at this time, went on to finish my GED, he was fired. Shortly after news an article that he had killed himself with a self-inflicted gunshot. What had happened during this period of time was a student had come forward to the administration and accused him of sexual misconduct, both of them being males. And unfortunately there was no real way to prove a negative for the missing time outside of school hours, so they promptly let him go. Being a gay, black teacher in South Texas, rough, he wrote a letter basically denying all of the accusations, but had come to the grim realization that at his age, his career was effectively over. So he shot himself in the head. Later the student who made the accusations came forward and said he had fabricated the entire event because he was failing his grades and angry. The whole event was quietly swept under the rug. R.I.P. Mr. Ethan, you were a good person who was cut down by other selfishness. Holy crap, that's depressing. I feel terrible for Mr. Ethan. That's honestly one of my worst fears. My high school of 500 students lost 5 teachers last year because they all had a relationship with the same 15-year-old girl. Our beloved teacher, Mr. Morn, had worked there for 29 years without incident and was one of the best teachers there. His classroom was always a laugh riot. He was the best roaster and encourages us to roast him properly. He never failed to get us motivated and a lot of us owe our career inspiration from him. He was fired because he had jokingly smacked a student on the back of his head for making a stupid comment. It was like something out of a sitcom and all of us expected it and loved it. Yet one student, who was new at the school, was culture shocked by this. He thought it was strange but hilarious. He told his mom offhandedly and his mom became the Karen. Never mind that the student was the teacher's godson. No physical contact was allowed, says the Karen. He was suspended with pay for 3 months pending investigation, then was let go because the Karen twisted the story and it blew up around the school. A year later, teacher won both the lawsuit against the school and libel case against the Karen, with her son being one of the key witnesses. We still keep in contact and roast him for getting rich over smacking kids around. Holy crap, imagine your son testifying against you for a libel case. One PE teacher got called out for having erections while watching the girls play sports. Got confronted by the principal, to whom he told it wasn't true, that it just seemed like he had erections because he has a really big dong. The principal, male, was not amused. The PE teacher was fired that same week. It would be a shame if he had a really big dong. Meo. She wasn't enforcing detention, letting students leave early, or just signing their name for them. She was also the mom of a student. They fired her and all the students that regularly received detention rioted, jumping on cars, flipping trash cans. They set one on fire and pulled the fire alarm 7 times in a day. I forget how it was quelled, but it only lasted a day. Probably got threatened with more detention. Had a history teacher get fired for going off syllabus and spending time on the pre-Judaic flood stories. One of maybe 2 reasons I'm obsessed with Mesopotamian, Anatolian, Egyptian history now. Teachers telling stories or discussing about other subjects is actually very useful to students. It's like the sign of a good teacher. He was playing his guitar for students at my elementary school. He had been warned before, but the kids enjoyed it so he continued to play it for them anyways. One day, the assistant principal was lurking in the hallway and wandered to his classroom. She saw him playing his guitar and fired him on the spot. A whole lot of students were crying that day because he was an amazing guy. I don't see anything wrong with a little bit of music. My sociology teacher in high school was fired for throwing a chalkboard eraser at a sleeping student's head. He was a great teacher and always did this in good humor. Obviously not a great idea in retrospect, but we all knew that we could get away with sleeping in his class if we didn't mind getting an eraser upside the head if he noticed. I heard he was fired a few years after I graduated high school, and that kinda bummed me out. Probably deserving of a reprimand of some sort, but not getting fired. It's not like he was a sex offender or guitar player. Guitar players are all fired on the spot. Him and his college buddies invited an underage student over to his house for drinks. They then proceeded to drug and rape her. He still kept his job for a while after the fact because the girl was terrified and didn't know what to do, so she told her friends, which then made the story spread like wildfire, and all the people in a position to do something about it thought it was just a prank. Well, turns out it wasn't a prank. He got sent to prison. Considering it was a drugging and gang rape of a minor, he's probably out by now. I guarantee you he left the state because everyone and their angry redneck dad with a 12 gauge knew about what he did. I still think about this all the time. The assistant principal that kicked me out school for smoking weed got arrested for picking up a prostitute, then fired. Pot will ruin your life. How? The one that for fired was a substitute teacher and coach of a girls team for grade 7-9. He seemed a bit creepy, and we joked that he liked coaching the girls and teaching pay so he could watch the girls run around in their shorts. It turns out that wasn't far from the truth. His full-time job was in the medical field, where he was caught doing inappropriate things to female patients, some of whom being kids he coached and taught, and he had 2 sons in that school. This one didn't get fired, but she was at the point where she had a few classes taken from her, and if she did anything wrong, she would have been gone. Why? Well, she didn't know the subjects she was teaching, and would make stuff up rather than admitting she didn't know the answer. She was always mad, and we called her Popsicle because she acted like she had a stick up her butt. But the biggest thing was that she failed 2 grade 11 classes. The whole class, because apparently not one person, including the smartest people in the school, passed any tests. I had a teacher like the second one, science teacher, who believed the earth was flat. She was also a huge bee. TW. Suicide. Our principal was escorted out by 2 police. Come to find out it was because he was caught committing fraud. He would assign students to classes without telling them to make it seem there were more kids in, let's say, the art department, so that the department would receive more funding from the government to continue. He meant well, but students caught on when we moved to college and transcripts from high school had a whole page F's or withdrawals. It really messed us up. About 2 weeks later he hung himself, left behind a wife and kids. It really hit me hard because I almost dropped out of high school after 2 of my friends committed suicide. He was the one that got me counseling, helped me graduate, and encouraged me to go to college. I would not be here if it weren't for him. It just really hurt to know that while he was helping me accomplish that, he did the same thing only a month or 2 later. We planted trees for him to remember him by. R.I.P. Mr. Woodcroft, you meant well. I think what gets me is that our country is so broken that he felt like he had to do that to get the kids he cared about help. Thank you for putting a TW on it, and I'm so sorry for your loss. Teachers at my high school got fired on a pretty regular basis. Principal was a narcissist, but here's one of the rare ones we actually heard about. The school went into lockdown because someone was seen hopping over the fence onto campus at the start of the school day. Freshman geography teacher locked his door, didn't control his class, wouldn't let one of the students back in, and jumped at every sound he heard. For comparison, the sub in senior literature next door didn't have a key to lock the door, but grabbed the handle, got on the floor, and planted both his feet on the frame so that the door couldn't be opened. I think the dude was a linebacker for football, too. He was a wonderful, friendly, and handsome teacher. This girl had a crush. Some bee told the teacher about this girl's crush. The teacher felt awkward and avoided her eyes from then on. Girl got hurt. Complained to the principal that he was being creepy with her. All the heads, which included my father, were called for a beating with him. He got sick of defending himself, shouted, "Frick y'all," and left the school. They fired him before he could hand out his resignation. When it's the kid's fault is the worst. 2 teachers, actually, for almost the same crime. At first I thought they were for the same thing, but apparently not. First guy, music teacher, fired before I had his class, thankfully, was selling sex toys, condoms, etc. to high school students, was fired and arrested. Second teacher, had all of his classes. He had a history of being really creepy, filmed girls while they worked out stretched, had a massive jug of lotion next to his computer, and was often caught by students watching looking at pee. He one time told us a story, unprompted, about how his brother called people about being suicidal, and when they found him he had killed his wife, then himself. He was fired after one kid spoke up about actually seeing pee on his computer. He was fired for that, and only that. Was never arrested, certainly should have been. He was a bully, and a creep. However low-key he was about it. There were like 3 computers in the teacher's personal computer in most classrooms. One day they found child pee on the teacher's computer and was fired. It wasn't until a couple years later did they find out that it was a student that put it there because she was mad she didn't get a better grade on her paper. I don't know why she was using the teacher's computer or what happened to either of them after it was found out. The art teacher at my middle school was known to be very suspicious. I've heard that he would take pictures of girls and touch girls, and adding to the fact that he called 2 girls lesbians in front of the whole class. It was just very weird. All these rumors and he got fired eventually. I can't imagine how his wife must have felt when she asked why he got fired. They didn't fire him based on rumors. My money's on they had solid evidence against him, but it wasn't made public. Kindergarten teacher would dig furrows into kids' arms with her long, sharp nails by basically holding their arms real tightly. She did this if she caught them misbehaving during recess. It happened to me when I was running when I shouldn't have, I think. This was nearly 40 years ago. I showed the principal my arm as he was walking out one day and she was fired on the spot. I think I was 4 at the time and didn't realize exactly what I did at the time. Crazy crap. I went to a pretty conservative Catholic school. In 7th grade we had a music teacher that pretty much only taught us lyrics to Bob Dylan songs and other 60s hippie music. He was gone the next year. Our elementary school just got a new principal. Frick you Mr. Tepner, who was on some fricking power trip or some crap, and he fired all the newer teachers at my school including my 5th grade teacher. Mr. Deathloff. If you're out there, you will always be the best teacher I've ever had. Apparently he called a girl a W or something similar and they were in 7th grade. They seemed like a cool science teacher before though. He said whoever threw that paper, their mom's a hoe. A teacher gave alcohol to some students in a field trip out of the country. They students were 16-17 and they asked if they could order beer. Later they took photos and it was all over Facebook. This was years after I graduated, but rumors spread quickly. If the teacher is being cool, don't post it on Facebook and get them fired. Rule number 1 of field trips. Tomorrow I'm going to get fired for a private Facebook post. What's the dumbest reason you've ever been fired? I worked midnights at a steel mill as a very young adult for 2 years. I had access to the entire network to do some of my work, even though I was just a general laborer. Union shop. Long story short, someone had left their login and password in a file on the public directory. I, being the good little worker, pointed it out to my direct supervisor. From there, I thought it was over. Turns out, he took this account that belonged to a wonderful older woman that also happened to have unrestricted access and logged into fetish kink sites at work. He was hardcore busted. What does he do? Points the finger at me and says I'm the one that gave him the password and login. Ballum. Fired for hacking a corporate network. That's what you get for being young. I got fired for turning in my 2-week notice. WorldCom sucked butt anyway. I worked in this costume shop, and my boss, who was obviously very unhappy with her life, had built this place up in her head and acted like we were some designer store on Rodeo Doctor. In my free time I write for a couple of local blogs and magazines, go to events, Fashion Week and things like that. I always got invites to these events and she never did, and would always say it was because she is too important for them, so people were intimidated to invite her. When I'd work the day after an event, she'd pick on me the entire day and say the event was probably lame and all the people they had to be tacky. She even got in my face and called me a S one day because a guy from one of the events recognized me and said hello while I was working. Finally, after I got an amazing opportunity and got to cover Fashion Week and go for free and everything, I went into work and she told me I was fired. I'd betrayed her. Plus side is I immediately got offered a job at an actual clothing store, with benefits and commission. No more selling pimp and hot dog costumes. I saw a dishwasher at the old restaurant I worked at get fired because one of the cooks at the time got mad and threw a plate across the kitchen. The plate shattered, and seconds after the owner walked in and without any further inquiry fired the person responsible for washing the dishes. I did not begin that story thinking the dishwasher was a person. I was fired from an ice cream shop for not being gay. It turned out the manager was looking to replace a young girl who had been working there before me and who she had been having a lesbian relationship with. I'm having difficulty counting how many ways this is illegal. I was fired last summer from my job managing a pool after almost dying in a chlorinator explosion caused by poor training of another new manager because I lost the pool's door keys while escaping a cloud of chlorine gas. The new manager before me had closed the valves both to and from our chlorine feeder after accidentally putting in too many chlorine pucks, leaving a virtual pipe bomb of slowly dissolving chlorine for me to find the next morning. When I unlocked the door to the pool's pump room, I didn't notice both valves were closed. It is typical to shut the outgoing valve for the night, so I turned off the main pump and went to open the chlorine feeder to put a few pucks in for the day. As soon as I put my hand on the lid to open her up, half of the 12x 24 inches feeder exploded upwards, jamming one of my fingers, raining acid, and unleashing a horrible cloud of chlorine gas. Amidst the chaos of lung, eye, and skin burning, I dropped the keys which had been in my hand the whole time. I called my supervisor to tell him what happened. He promptly came to the pool, sympathetic, and installed a new feeder. 2 days later I was called in to meet with the owner of the management company. He told me he was disappointed that I lost the keys to the pool, that I lost them because I was careless, and that if I didn't find them I would not be hired back for the next season. I didn't find them. He never addressed the fact that I could have been killed due to his company's neglect. I was scheduled to work on a Friday and got diagnosed with mono on a Monday. I don't know if you've ever had mono, but it knocks you on your butt pretty hard. I showed my employer my note on Monday and promptly was picked up by my mother and brought home to get taken care of properly. I got a text from my boss on Friday saying that I needed to come in or I was fired. When I reminded him I had mono, he said that my job was to sit at a desk and take to-go orders. I also check to-go orders, which means I have direct contact with people's food. Dumbest crap ever. I slept 14 hours a day when I had mono and could barely function for long enough to take one final at a time. Your boss is a dong. Apparently said GM lost out on his Christmas bonus because too much money had gone missing on his watch, so he was super pissed. So he comes in one night he wasn't working and asks to see this tiny little 18-year-old kid who had just been promoted like 2 weeks prior outside. I was 21 at the time. The other manager was maybe 5 feet 5 inches and 120 pounds soaking wet. About 20 minutes later the GM comes back in rubbing his knuckles and looks me in the eye and says, "Hey, Joker thief, I'm going to need you to clean up some blood." So in shock I go outside and sure enough there is blood all over the back smoking garbage area, and I start to clean it up while he stands and watches me while telling this sap story about his life and money woes and how much the kid deserved it. He then goes home and the rest of the staff and I are just kind of standing there shocked that this just happened. About an hour later the 18-year-old manager comes back, and his face is barely recognizable. I told him to go to the hospital, but he refused for whatever reason, and he said he called the cops and asked me to back up his story, which I tell him I would. So another half hour or so passes and then the cops show up at Taco Bell and I give them a statement that is completely truthful. Chatted with the cops for a while, give them some free tacos and then head home for the night. Next day I come into work and the GM asks to see me outside. Now I'm 6 tall and 275 pounds and grew up in a rougher neighborhood, so I'm not some easy target, and was, at that point, almost eager for him to hit me so I can teach him a lesson. He got in my face and it seemed like he was weighing his options, but he decided against it and just asked me if I talked to the cops, to which I replied yes, and I'm surprised he hadn't been arrested already. He then says, "Finish out your shit and don't bother coming back. You're fired." So I said, "Oh heck no. If you're gonna fire me, have the balls to do it in front of everyone." So I walk back inside, ask all the staff that were there to gather around and that the GM has something he'd like to say. So put on the spot he fires me then and there, and I go home to call the labor board to see how badly I can sue their asses for wrongful termination. Turns out I can't. I hadn't worked there long enough and didn't make enough money, which was a real pee-off. I hated that job anyways and I got another one pretty quick, so it wasn't a huge deal, but it still blows my mind, and people rarely believe me when I tell the story. Just for some background, I really love this job. I had been there for over 4 years. I started when I was 16. I started at the bottom and proved to management I was trustworthy. I worked my entire 8+ HR shift by myself most days. Management sent me to deposit money into the bank when we were overflowing with cash. I wrote schedules when the manager needed me to. I was getting bonuses weekly from home office because of my sales customer service. I never cheated. I never stole. And I loved that job. I envisioned myself working there until after I graduated college. Sure, I wasn't being paid jack crap, but they were flexible with my school hours and that's all I really wanted at the time. They closed a store a city over, which my boss wife happened to manage. Due to poor sales, they'd decide to promote my boss to regional and move her over to my store and have her manage it. She's been with the company 15 years. It's cool, whatever. I've met her a couple of times. Within a day of her being there, she starts telling me everything I'm doing wrong. Within 2 days, I'm being written up for the first time ever in 4 years because I clocked in 5 minutes before my shift was supposed to start. My previous manager always had me clock in as soon as I came in so I could get to work on shipment and phone orders. Day 3 rolls around. New manager has girl from her former store come and fill out an application and wants me to show her the ropes of how things work here. Day 4. Old boss, who is now regional manager, catches me before I walk in. Can't look me in the face all during the conversation. Reason for termination: poor sales. I guess I got it lucky. They fired me in November. They fired the assistant manager, who had been there 8 years, right before Christmas. I felt worse for her. She had kids. But yeah, I don't hold a grudge or anything. I needed it for a dose of reality. Up until that point I thought a loyal employee meant a loyal employer. I worked in a gas station in Chicago, making about $700 a week. I had 1 day off a month and I had to come in to do inventory on that day. I didn't mind all the hours because the pay was good. Anyways, I came down with an infection near my eye and went to the ER. The doctor told me I had to be admitted. Said I couldn't do that because I had to work. He told me best case I would just lose my eye, but more than likely the infection would go to my brain and I would die. So called work and let them know I was in the hospital. Spent 4 days I hooked to an IV that gave me 24 hours of antibiotics a day. Finally get out and go to work and get fired because of it. He told me it was because he needed someone for that shift and he really couldn't let them go after just hiring them. Company was too small to sue them over it. And to top it off, he fought my unemployment claim. I lost my phone the night of my college's senior formal. That night, I got a call from my boss announcing an emergency meeting the following morning, which obviously I missed, and was immediately fired along with 2 of my colleagues. So stupid. The meeting was to review 5 new menu items. I got fired from my university sports center job as a pool lifeguard for posting on Facebook that I found drugs in a toilet there. The next day I had a phone call asking me to remove said status, and shortly afterwards, an email to inform me that my employment had been terminated on grounds of besmirching the university's good name. No joke. HR actually used the word besmirching. I would have been impressed if I wasn't so furious. The university is in the UK if anyone was wondering. I've heard that if you don't mention the name of the place where you work, they can't fire you. What I find stupid here is instead of trying to solve the drug problem, they try to cover it up instead. And then it wouldn't matter to you whether you posted it or not. I was once fired from a radio news director job for being, quote, a loose cannon. I never know what you're going to do next. This was in reference to news stories and when they aired. Guess I should have shown him my magic calendar that told me when and where news would happen. I was fired 2 years into a position I was really great at, for not wearing any makeup and answering the phone on 2 rings, not 1 ring, by the new store manager who was there for 1 week. The owner was furious at him but I refused to go back. I was fired for refusing to help my boss forge receipts for his tax audit. I had the best college job in the world, watching the library computer labs on campus. I had about 4 shifts of varying length every week, and I always showed up on time. Very rarely had someone cover, and I would pick up a shift every other week or so. There was a rather large automated system so my boss knew I was among the more reliable lab attendants, which he even admitted after firing me. Anyway, there is 1 meeting before the start of each semester, and if you didn't show up for that meeting you were fired. End of story. There was nothing important at the meeting. If you sent an email letting him know you were not back in school yet, he would not fire you. When you consider the meeting would last about 15 minutes and there was really nothing to cover, it's all very arbitrary. He just had to fire a few people to make his job look important. I sent an email saying I wouldn't be on campus yet, but he didn't receive it. He sent me an email at the start of the semester to let me know I was fired, which is kind of like breaking up with someone via Twitter. I replied asking to meet him in person, which he pretty much never did with any of us, except for the one meeting every semester. After going back and forth, I finally was able to meet him and I showed him the email I sent. He admitted that it was hard to fire me as I was a very reliable lab attendant and picked up shifts no one wanted. He would still probably have to fire me, using the excuse what do I say to the other 2 people I fired for the same reasons? What if they come up with an email? 2. I asked if I was still, in fact, fired, and he said, I'll have to think about it. I requested, very clearly, that at the very least he call me or have me come by his office to tell me I am fired. 3 days later he sent me another email saying I was still fired. Mainly, I was pissed that I was fired by email, and this guy, who was such a lazy, useless boss that he contacted me all of 0 times the year I worked in the labs, didn't even have the balls to fire me in person. I was subbing for an 8th grade history teacher once. He had about 4 periods of the same course and all I needed to do was play a PowerPoint which included a video and read the slides aloud to the students. Prior to the last class of the day, one of the students messed around with the computer and the PPT was no longer usable or I couldn't find it. I don't remember, I just know I was sole at that point. Luckily, the teacher had printed out the PPT slides for me and I'd remembered almost everything that was on the video. I'm also a good teacher and am pretty good with improv. I started delivering the information from memory and was pretty entertaining, but got a bit carried away with myself when I said, and then the king said, let's get those French bastards and war began or something to that effect. The important thing is that I said bastard. The next day the principal called me into his office and said some students reported me for saying the word bastard. I knew I'd made a mistake, but I hadn't used the term directed at a student. And never mind the fact that I improvised the lesson from memory and on the spot. Never mind the fact that the students were entertained and spent the whole of the lesson giving me their undivided attention and asking excellent follow-up questions. A sign of engaged learning. I was removed permanently as a sub for that school because of this one incident. I was and still am a very talented substitute, but I get into occasional trouble because students refuse to speak to me if they have an issue and instead choose to report me out of context to their principal. I truly hate my job because of the terrible imbalance of power both students and teachers hold over subs. I always feel like I'm about to lose my job no matter if I'm a very active, great sub or if I'm a lazy, passive sub. There is no victory. Kids are stupid. They probably did it just because they could. Little bastards. I was working at a gas station alone on the graveyard shift, which I think is a violation of some sort. I was in the cooler stocking beer when I heard the bell ring on the door. I walked out of the cooler and was met by 2 black guys with guns. They threatened my life and robbed the place. I called the cops immediately after they left. The cops show up. I give descriptions of the guys, the gun, etc. My info was spot on. The cops reviewed the video of the robbery and concluded that I was involved because I was too calm. Nobody reacts that well to having a gun in their face. They told that to the manager who fired a few days later. My co-worker told me I was fired due to the cops telling them I was involved. It made it into the paper and the cops totally fudged the descriptions of the robbers. I mean, it wasn't even close. They didn't even make an attempt to search for them the night of the robbery. Sounds like the cops were involved, indirectly or otherwise. My first aircraft maintenance job out of college, I was working for a guy running a small shop at a rural airport. He was quite a character. Hardest that had the highest expectations of me and the other employee and would get pee off if we took too long, in his opinion, to do something. For example, we got an aeroplane in for 100-hour inspection that was very obviously long overdue and our crap was completely neglected on the previous one. The spark plugs were so caked with lead that it took me an hour to clean them out. He got mad that it took longer than the typical half hour and wouldn't hear any of my excuses. He'd get mad at me for taking too long to cut open an oil filter, in spite of his shop being a complete mess and it taking me 10 minutes to find the filter cutter. Even he didn't know where it was. Despite these factors, he rarely did any work himself, and set a bad example for us or downright fricked it up, but sat in the office allowing me, a completely green apprentice, and his other employee, a 4th year apprentice, to work unsupervised, and would take hour-long coffee breaks. If the other employee or I would get up to head back to work before he was done his coffee, he'd tell us to sit and relax. Anyway, when my 3-month probationary period was ending, he called me into his office and started grilling me about random aircraft knowledge. Again, since I was fresh out of school and that was my first job, I had very little practical knowledge, and looking back now, half the crap he was asking was stuff even a 2 or 3 year journeyman would be unlikely to know. So of course, I didn't know the answers to a lot of the questions. He got pissed off, as usual, and started ranting about the terrible quality of graduates the college was turning out and how he was going to phone them and complain. And then he sent me back to work saying that he had to think long and hard about whether he wanted to keep me on. I thought about it for the rest of the day and was pretty sure he was going to fire me. So the next morning I showed up. Soon as he arrived I told him I was quitting, packed up my tools and left. Got a better job a week later, at a reputable company that did things by the book, working supervised under a journeyman, and received absolutely glowing performance reviews and a good reference when I left for another job. I was a temp worker at a factory and I was walking past an air hose. The connector busted just as I passed it and it swung out and hit me in the head. It about knocked me out and I had a big gash on my forehead. I got a call while waiting in the doctor's waiting room to not come back and they did not need my help anymore. Granted, it was wrong that you were terminated for this, but a private Facebook post does not exist unless you send someone a private message. You shouldn't have been fired, but it was dumb to post that. Sorry. Find out the one customer I'm friends with on FB. Dude, you were playing with fire. I was going to make a playing with fire joke, but I thought, this comment is buried so low on the chain that no one but you and I will know of it. I'm going to tell you a secret. I'm actually a sociopathic teenager who uses his powers of manipulation to charm girls into liking me and then uses their affection to benefit me personally. Also, I lie compulsively on the internet. I worked at a farm stand grocery store as a young teen. On my 14th birthday, my friend who was working the register gave me extra yogurt-covered pretzels, worth a total of $1.18, as a little something special in addition to the other things I was purchasing. I was fired, she was fired, and the bagger was fired for not reporting it. I can understand firing us, but the bagger? Really? I doubt she ever paid attention to any of the transactions in such detail. After graduating from university, I was hired on to do communications at a small transportation company, newsletters, website updates, etc. I was doing really well at that and seeing great results, so the president decided that naturally my skills could easily be transferred over to the operations department, which was totally failing and needed to be turned around. Long story short, he gave me a month to fix a department that had been performing poorly for 4 years, and then fired me when I wasn't able to fix it. Never mind the fact that I am in no way trained and or qualified for work in operations. Never mind the fact that I was still doing a great job at the stuff I'd been originally hired to do. 3 days before firing me, he told me I was a star at the company communications. And never mind the fact that it takes at least a month just to learn how a department functions, and then much more time to come up with the ideas for improving its processes. Ugh. Still makes me angry just thinking about it. You got set up. Sorry. I was working IT at a public university and got tasked with replacing some laptops in a few classrooms. I began the work during the 15-minute break between classes, but it took me longer than expected. The class comes in and the teacher demands to use the computer, but I explained I was still setting it up and it would be ready soon. I called my boss to get his advice, but he was in a meeting and didn't answer. Eventually I finished and left. They lost maybe 15 minutes of class time out of 75 minutes. The teacher reported me to the dean, my boss's boss, and said I was intentionally rude to her because she is black. I got fired for not being remorseful about the incident after justifying my actions. Couldn't file for wrongful termination since I was a student employee. My best friend and I worked at the same store. She asked me to let her know her schedule for Saturday, and I told her she was supposed to start at 9. I came in for 10. At some point, the schedule got changed, but no one mentioned it, and I was supposed to come in for 9, her for 10. Either way, the shift was covered, but they walked me out even though it was my first ever tardy in the week before. The manager had loved me. Turns out one of the assistants didn't like me, so lied and said I'd been late many times before. It was dumb on so many levels. My last job often had shift changes without informing people. Luckily my boss was pretty down to earth and knew I'd check my hours on a Monday as I'd often stop to chat. I worked as a laborer in a roofing factory, through a temp agency, for about 9 months in 2003, on third shift, 11 PM 7 AM. There were 4 of us operating a roofing roller, but only 3 positions to fill. So, everyone took turns. 30 minutes on position 1, 30 minutes on position 2, 30 minutes on position 3, 30-minute break, rinse, repeat. If you showed up at the roller last, you would inevitably have to take a 30-minute break as soon as you walked in. Realizing I could use this to my advantage, I intentionally started showing up first and taking position 1, so that my last 30-minute break would begin at 6:30 AM, and I could clock out and head home early. The non-temp workers, including several supervisors, knew what I was doing, and didn't see any problem with it. After several weeks of this, I go into the temp agency to pick up my paycheck. The lady at the front desk tells me that I have to talk to the boss man to get my check. So, I head back to his office and promptly get canned for costing the temp agency money. Suckers. I got fired for not doing someone else's job. Literally, I was launching a round of website changes. I was responsible for security and application testing, third-party integration testing and launching the site. I got fired because I didn't notice that one dude's part of the site copy wasn't correct, and I hadn't even been involved in that part of the site whatsoever. Frick those guys. Life has been much better not making crappy marketing websites. I got fired from a mom-and-pop video store because we were both trying to buy the store from the previous owner, and the landlord picked him over me only because every time the landlord came in looking for the previous owner, he came in the morning. I worked nights. He worked mornings. The previous owner was a deadbeat who hadn't paid rent in a year or so the landlord took over. He tried to be cool about it, saying he didn't need me anymore like he was doing me some kind of favor. I feel it's important to mention that he is legally blind and couldn't even drive himself to work. He had to hold everything right up to his face to even see what it was, and even then he still made mistakes on what movies were taken out. That place closed barely a year after that. I was sad to see it go, but I love that he failed miserably. This was about 2006-ish, before the fall of the video store. I like to believe I could have kept it alive for a few years, but who knows, maybe it's best I didn't buy it. An old job I worked at had several occurrences where someone was fired for a bull's reason. This one old guy who was a seasonal hire and your general really nice old guy. Well, one B of a woman said she felt uncomfortable around him and they fired him right after that. We had a point system where if you mess up on enough products, we engraved on different items, you'll get a point, and once you get to 10 then they fired you. They always told you when you got a point. This one guy who had been working there for years and generally liked by everyone was fired after getting to 10 points without any warning that he was even getting points. I was once fired from a dollar store because I made change between 2 cash registers when we were really busy. Policy required that I take a big bill from one register back to the office and make change in the office. One of the cashiers, who wanted my job, told the store manager and I was fired. I told my on-duty manager at my last job he was an idiot for employing someone who lacked most major math skills for an accountant when he had someone with a degree in accounting who was willing to work for less already on staff. I used to do landscaping for about 1.5 years as my previous job. My boss offered me commission finder fees for any jobs that his employees found him. One of my good friends needed a lot of work done around his family's house. I thought, perfect, I'll give this job to my boss and collect the $200 he had offered. The job was not a small job in the slightest. He had quoted them $4,000 to complete the work. Upon asking my boss about the finder's fee, he then gave me the runaround and stated that he can only give me $50. I thought about it for a minute and then said frick that noise. I called him the next day and told him my friend didn't want the work done anymore. I then told my friend that I would do the work on the weekend for $2,500. I went there on my day off, got the entire job done with my own tools. I hired my own crew, paid everyone well between $20 to $25 per hour. One of the people that I hired, a supposed friend, knew my boss and told him that I did the job. Boss fired me. I would have fired you too. You can't have your employees competing with you. I'm not saying he was right to try and screw you on the commission, but you had to expect his reaction would be to fire you. Not me, but one of my friends used to work for a national weight loss supplement company. She worked at one of their stores, selling natural weight loss kits to gullible rich customers. She worked for them for a little over a year and was one of their best employees. The week before she was fired, she was their employee of the week because she made the most commission that week. She was paid minimum wage, as well as commission for however many products she sold. During her last week, when some of her co-workers found out about her getting Employee of the Week, they spread nasty rumors about her to the boss, and unfortunately, her boss believed them. My friend was fired and was given a vague reason, along the lines of her performance not being up to standard. She was shocked to say the least, but in the end, she was glad to be out of that job. She said that many of her co-workers were catty and trying to one-up each other in sales. Did any of you witness a teacher at your school get fired? If so, what for? Did they freak out or just do something so strange or cross the line that they were let go? Surprisingly, the French teacher who constantly showed films featuring naked children, had us read comics with naked children, and read from books that described naked children was fired when they found the pictures of naked children. The French teacher who immediately took over for him lasted 4 months. She threw a brick at a student. I don't actually think I've had a normal French teacher. Can confirm, French teachers are never normal. Source: 12 years of French immersion in the Ontario public school system. An English teacher in my high school accepted a better paying job at a nearby college and decided to tell the school faculty so that they would have ample time to replace him for the next school year. It was the end of March at the time. The school ended up firing him on the spot and told him not to bother coming back after the day was over. It was really sad. He spent the rest of the day giving away things from his classroom to his students. I actually asked a friend and the new job required him to leave the school a week earlier than school let out to start his new job, and that is why they fired him. But still, it was crappy of the school. A teacher at my high school was really close with the students, like following students on Instagram and Twitter close. Nobody thought anything about it because that was her personality until we found out she ended up sleeping with a junior. The student body didn't know about it until one day she was not there. She lost her job and her husband, which she had 3 kids with. Everyone was shocked at first, but looking back at it, it was quite obvious something was going on. I read junior as janitor. I was horribly confused until I realized my mistake. Basically, 2 female teachers were freaking students, middle school. A male teacher was being inappropriate, physically and verbally, with female students, high school. Oh yeah, there was the teacher selling roids to the football players. My 4th grade teacher was fired because someone crap on the floor of the boys' room and he thought that he'd get to the bottom of it by lining up all the boys and sniffing their asses. I was in 5th grade social studies when my teacher had a small break with reality caused by PTSD from serving some years prior. A kid was playing with the chalkboard erasers at the back of the classroom and clapped them together hard. Sounded like a gunshot, and the teacher thought so too apparently. He quickly jumped over his desk and hit the floor, screaming at the students to run before we all got shot. He then threw a stapler as if it were a grenade and screamed for about 10 seconds straight. Took 3 school resource officers to get this guy to snap back. Needless to say, he got fired after a few days leave. That sucks, as it wasn't really his fault. I was office runner for my last period and I witnessed my English teacher get fired. It was awkward as heck because she was a B to me and I had to pretend like I didn't know what was going on while I picked up paperwork. When you're office runner, You get to see everything, like when your bus driver is not allowed to be driving the school bus anymore because he ran a red light at 80 km per hour. When I was 10, I was in a class with 36 kids. It was way too much, and all of us were pretty horrible, but one kid was the worst. He vomited in the drawer of the teacher's desk because he thought it was fun. For example, when there was 1 minute silence for something serious, he wouldn't stop laughing. One day he just wouldn't stop yelling. He sat next to the door that was half open. After some time the teacher walks towards him, grabs the chair the boy's sitting on, and throws boy and chair through the half open door. Another teacher was in the hallway and saw it, and our teacher was sent home. He didn't come back. Sounds like a cool guy. I wish some of our teachers would do that to Aaron. That guy is a douche. And of course he harassed the new teachers the most. Not to repost my second top comment, but one of the music teachers in HS mailed a raccoon's head to his boss. I don't recall why he did it, but he was fired nonetheless. I just imagine a middle-aged guy stumbling outside in the middle of the night with a rifle and muttering to himself, I need to find something with a head and remove it. Put that crap in a box. Yep, that'll show him. Didn't witness it, but a teacher was manipulated into a fight with a student at my high school. It was the student's fault, but the teacher was let go anyway. As much as the situation sucked, many people were disappointed with how the local papers handled it, mostly because his surname was Shots. Headline easily could have been Shots Fired. Instead they went with a boring title. Shots Fried at local high school. Saw our football coach lead a prayer at a pep rally and get fired shortly thereafter. He had done it before and had been directed not to. The last time he made it a point that he was told not to do so before he began. He said that he had been told he couldn't lead a prayer, but if he did it would sound like this. A man warned is half saved. History teacher got fired because she jokingly said her favorite song was I Don't Frick With You. Obviously she didn't say the frick part, but they still fired her. Nobody knew what happened until like a week later when she posted about it on Facebook. All we knew was from a small whiteboard she had taped to her wall that said love you all in her handwriting. Her replacement was that sub. Yeah, we all know the one I'm talking about. The one that took crap way too literally. The one that hated everyone equally. The one that said to a class of kids that were misbehaving that she thought our schooling was a waste of taxpayer money. The one that always bragged about having a freaking quadruple master. Is that a thing in history? Yep, that's right, Ms. May. I'm talking to you. IDFW Ms. May. Back in 8th grade, a teacher at my school was fired for inappropriate conduct among students. Rumor had it that he was incredibly mean to his class, especially the girls. I never learned why. He also slapped one of his students in the hall, which I saw. It was quite brutal. He deserved to be fired. I never witnessed the teacher getting fired, but I read about a substitute getting arrested and consequently fired. It started with Florida making it harder to get prescription painkillers out of state, so her boyfriend went from Oxy to dealing H and got her hooked. To afford her habit, she and her boyfriend were caught robbing a bank. That got her fired, but then they found out she also stole a dozen or so MacBooks from the school too. A dozen MacBooks is more money than you would get robbing a bank. Those suckers are pricey. I had a teacher get fired for telling a bunch of students to take pictures of themselves doing push-ups and other exercises in their underwear and hand them in with their essays for extra credit. Shortly after, one of the parents expressed their concern towards the principal about why they were taking pictures of their kids like this for a class. The teacher was investigated and fired. This took place at an all-boys school, with the class in question being aged between 14-16, and the teacher taught economics. Why he didn't get caught earlier was beyond me. And the teacher taught economics. WTF. My favorite history teacher was let go of because two schools in the area merged. Locations were separate, but it was now for different level students, and this apparently meant that they had too many teachers. Because he was new, he was let go of. It's understandable that they chose him over teachers who had been working there for years, but kind of sad to see a great passionate teacher who could make almost anyone interested laid off, while keeping teachers who did nothing to keep the lessons interesting. Mr. Bus, grade 9 social studies teacher. He'd just disappear from mid-class a lot. Sometimes he wouldn't even be there at all. He'd just randomly be a no-show. We later found out that he had a passion for golf. He was a real jerk and I never saw his reaction when he was let go, but I am sure he made a stink because he had a very bad temper. My college anatomy professor was fired because he was going through all the female students' personal information and getting their phone numbers. He would call them and ask them out to dinner and stuff. A teacher in my school poured holy water on a gay student's desk, then told him he had a demon inside him and was going to heck. Hopefully, I'll see her fired shortly. He wrote the answers to the standardized tests on the board and told everyone to get a few wrong. People didn't listen and he resigned before the official investigation. I had a crazy geography teacher who bit a female student on her butt while she was writing something on the chalkboard. Yes, he was fired for it. I had this one substitute teacher I had a few years back, Mr. King, a total nutter. On our first day with him he stood on a counter in our woodwork room behind a cabinet and waited till people came in and stared them down. A few days later, after two guys were talking in his class, nothing too out of the ordinary, he flipped out, marched them out the door and pinned each of them against the wall with either hand. One came back laughing his butt off and the other was crying. If there was a teacher equivalent to a rug cop, then Mr. King was it. Lasted a month or two. Not sure if he quit or was fired, but I haven't seen him since. Made class interesting at least. My teacher left a phone off her desk. One of the students grabbed her phone and looked through it. There was a pic of her with CM on her face, and that was that. The kid shouldn't have looked through her phone, teacher or not, that's personal property. Not exactly on topic, but when I was in 10th grade, my Spanish teacher, with an ex-wife and 2 kids, actually came out to my class. There was a large Christian population in my school, but none of the kids cared that he was gay, but their parents wanted his head. They tried to fire him and all of the student body, even the French class kids, since he taught Spanish, sat in the hallway until they brought him back. 2 days of this and countless detentions we were assigned. The superintendent eventually caved. He was reinstated. We all went to class and that was the first time I've ever seen a grown man cry in happiness. It's the proudest I've ever been of my peers. Dude, that rocks. Thank you for standing up for him. An assistant football coach at my high school who was in his 40s started dating one of the senior girls. Now this was back in the mid 80s, and the girl was already 18 because she had been held back a year at some point. But the administration still couldn't let it stand and they fired him. He and the girl immediately got married against her parents' wishes, and last I heard, 30 years ago, they were living in a dilapidated trailer in rural Louisiana. Ah, love. Props to them for staying together for 30 years. One teacher was fired for having an affair with a 11th grader. They eventually married. The other allegedly touched some boys on a field trip, so was forced to resign. He was never prosecuted due to lack of evidence. A friend and I got a teacher fired. He was the type of teacher that assumes no one will be interested in his lesson, high school chemistry, and so never really teaches anything. Before our final exams, we complained to our principal that our entire class had learned virtually nothing. The school told us he was taking permanent leave, but after we graduated the principal told us he'd been pressured into retiring early. I feel pretty bad about it. He was a nice guy and knew his subject. He just didn't know how to teach at a high school level. If I'd known they were going to fire him, I definitely wouldn't have said anything. Maybe he was just distracted with making M. Yeah, one time in the 5th grade this sub got fired on the spot for throwing a chair at a kid. The kid has got in trouble and the dub told him he shouldn't be doing whatever he was doing because he was only a kid. And he stood up and said, "I am a grown butt man," and the guy picked up the chair and yelled, "You little freak up," and the principal just so happened to be in one of her I wonder what those kids are up to moods and saw the whole thing. He got suspended from the district. My grade 3 or 4, it was a long time ago, I don't remember, teacher got sacked for teaching us how to tie a hangman's noose for Halloween decorations. Apparently some parents didn't approve. Came to school the next day and had a new teacher. Turn up to first year HS science class with no teacher and notice on our desks explaining the teacher has been fired and we will most likely find out why in the newspapers. Turns out the ultra smart science teacher had constructed one of the most complex and largest M labs ever busted in the country. Story goes his mother was dying from cancer and it motivated him to make as much money as soon as possible to pay for her treatments. This is well before Breaking Bad BTW. Teacher at my elementary school had a notable accident where he lost it because the third graders wouldn't stop talking and threw chairs and desks across the room. Our school went into a lockdown then after we were let go early. Teacher was fired and now teaches at a kindergarten. Last year my town's high school had 2 teachers arrested within a month. The choir director for filming girls changing with a spy pen and an ASL teacher for child molestation. I didn't attend the school but many of my friends went there. In high school I had a substitute teacher fired and it was only his first day of teaching. Basically he was taking off his pants to put on his biking shorts but for some reason he decided to do it in front of everyone in class. Smooth. There was a teacher when I was in middle school that supposedly banged one of the students, pretty sure it was a high school student, but still, I don't remember him being around after that. 8th grade algebra teacher also coached football and cursed at the players. He got fired, but not before sitting silently at his desk for a few days. Those were some tense classes. The premier Catholic high school in Fargo, ND. Back in the late 70s, the Christian Brother chorus leader got shipped off to a monastery after allegations of wrongdoing with the boys in the choir. Saw him on a Christian Brothers wine commercial in California in the mid-80s. Very strange. There was a kid in grade 12 that kept telling the teacher that he can't tell him what to do and things like that. When the teacher asked him to step outside, the kid replied with "Shut up." You see, the teacher flipped the kid's desk, grabbed him by the neck and threw him outside. That was his last day. The kid got a couple of days suspension. Midway through year 10 we got a new teacher for physics. She was crap. She was straight out of uni and couldn't control the class at all and we were a pretty tame class. There were a couple of boys that messed about and she didn't know how to deal with it. Her solution was to give us class detentions and said it was up to us to put pressure on them to behave. After the second or third time the whole class just turned against her. Even the geeky kids started peeing around in lessons and just totally ignoring her. She ran out crying one day and never came back. You guys sound like shoots. Teachers have to start somewhere. Once in 4th grade we had a substitute teacher that was pretty trashy. While we were doing some work, she decided to look at bras. Another student saw her and we never saw her again. Back in high school a bunch of teachers were being laid off at the end of the year because our high school was combining with another one. Generally I felt that the teachers that were being laid off spent a lot less time teaching and more time talking about other topics. My Catholic religion teacher got transferred to a different school after having an affair with a married English teacher. He didn't get fired and was actually a really great, if slightly intimidating, guy. He was the assistant principal when I got to the high school and I heard the story from a few older students. He was a math teacher back in the day. There was one student who giving him a really hard time and one day he just snapped. He flipped the desk with the student still in it. It was one of those older desks with the chair attached to the desk by a bar. He went Hulk and bowled the poor bastard over, totally forgetting the kid's seat was attached to it. Got a great rhyming nickname, Karate Mazzati. I didn't see them get fired, but when I was at primary school, there were several really suspicious fires in buildings that the headmaster of the school had been in. After the 3rd fire or so, the police got involved and it turned out that my form teacher, aka the guy who took registration for my class, was just a complete mentalist, and he was trying to assassinate the headmaster in a way that didn't obviously look like murder, and so he decided on arson of buildings that the headmaster was in, including setting fire to my classroom. I wouldn't say this is a narrow escape, but it is a bit sobering to realize that I, and all of my classmates, had been in a room with someone who was deeply mentally ill, wanting to commit murder, and could have quite easily committed arson on our classroom after shutting and locking the door. 5 years ago, a teacher from my elementary school was caught with a loaded shotgun in her home and allegedly growing marijuana in her backyard during an investigation. All charges were eventually dropped, but she was fired. Way back in 1968 when I was in 2nd grade, I got a teacher either fired or transferred to another school. A friend of mine got kicked in the stomach during recess, and he soiled and wet himself. When we came back to class, he told the teacher he had an accident, but never mentioned that he was kicked. The teacher made him stand in the front of the class in his wet crappy pants until his mom came with a change of clothes. Before his mom got there, I asked to use the restroom. I made a beeline to the principal's office to tell him what was going on. We walked back to the classroom together, and when the principal opened the door, the teacher was in the middle of berating my friend for crying. The principal had me take my friend to the nurse's office, and for the teacher to come with him. We had a substitute for the rest of the day, and a new teacher for the rest of the year. TLDR. Got a teacher fired for humiliating a friend. Good on ya. My 8th grade art teacher was a pedophile. Some boys came forward and said that he tried to molest them and he went on the run, but was caught shortly after. Guy had a wife, but me and my friends always said he probably was a pedophile. You could really tell he was a creep. Employers and managers who had to fire someone on their first day. What happened? So I'm not a manager or employer, but I do get copied on all the termination notice emails for the retail locations our company has, for some reason. For terms on the first day, there's a bunch of the expected didn't show up for training, got a different job, extremely late to training, etc. There was also fist fight with customer, drug use, violation of company policy, dude tried to steal merchandise, and arrested, though for what, I don't know. There's probably some other great ones but none that come to mind at the moment. Fist fight with customer, my dream. I worked at a popular teen college kid clothing store. I wasn't the manager, but I trained new hires. This one girl shopped at the store a lot and we were excited to hire her. She was let go because she was late, was caught trying on clothes instead of greeting, and apparently laughed when anyone asked for a size larger than a medium. Her family showed up at the end of her shift and tried to buy $2K $3K worth of clothes with her employee discount. Corporate policy sucks, so they got a good portion of it. Her mom tried to bring it all back years later, completely worn, destroyed, and threw a fit saying she should get full price because the girl had died. Guess who we could all see sitting in her mom's car? The store is American Eagle. I was working as a waiter in a fancy restaurant. This classy guy shows up, well dressed, well mannered, looking for a job as a cook. They needed help back in the kitchen, so they hired him on the spot. Next morning he shows up, drunk as frick. Not in a had a super night out with the buddies. I'm still a little hungover kind of way, but more in a just downed a bottle of whiskey for breakfast kind of way. He had watery eyes, awful breath, he stuttered, struggled to walk straight but somehow managed to keep his head high. So management said frick it, put him to work. The very first thing he does is grab a big prawn and manages to fricking stab his own finger with it, right under the nail. Lots of blood and pain. Everybody is dumbfounded by this prowess. They immediately sent him home, maybe 10 minutes after he started his new job. As someone who has at one point spent almost 4 months out every day bringing resumes and applying for jobs, this kind of crap baffles me. I saw someone fired on their second day. They were hired as an admin document controller. They were functionally computer illiterate. It took them half an hour to copy a file to a flash drive. Half an hour. Not first day, but I had to fire a delivery driver because she couldn't drive. Had a license, just couldn't drive a vehicle safely to save her life. Scared one of my other drivers, another manager, and finally was recommended to me that I do a ride along to ensure they weren't out of their minds. Nope, she was a horrible driver. 2-lane road. Spent most of the time with wheels over the fog line because she was afraid of cars coming her way. Needless to say, I now ask prospective delivery drivers if they can drive well. I worked as a manager in an upscale seafood restaurant a few years ago. We had recently hired a few more wait staff, 4 staff, to cope with the customer demand as summer was starting. Excited to train up new staff for the first time ever, 3 of them turned up on time and got started with their buddy staff. Guy number 4 turned up over an hour late, stunk of alcohol and BO and had dark yellow pit stains on his apparently new white uniform shirt. I fired him within 10 minutes. He then proceeded to knock over chairs and pull tablecloths off tables, so security was called. First person I ever fired. I felt bad and then went out for a smoke before getting back into work. Another reason why I left the hospitality industry. Staff turnover too high, too easy to burn out. I manage a coffee shop lunchy place. Young girl came in fresh out of culinary school and had previous coffee shop experience. What could go wrong, right? The first day I had her shadow the other employees just to get a hang of the POS system and general flow of the store. Nope. Customers overwhelmed her and she liked to hide in the back leaning on the ice machine. Fine. Whatever. She said she loved baking earlier on, so I sent her to the kitchen to make some cookies. I'm super chill. I didn't even care what kind. As long as they were freaking awesome and delicious, she had creative control. She comes out some time later admitting she doesn't know how to make cookies and needs help. Now I'm getting bloody frustrated. As we move on into lunch rush, a wave of customers flood the front of house and I was needed. I had 40 liters of soup in the back needing a titch more and asked her to thicken it a tad before serving. Surely she could handle that. Soups and sauces being addressed in the first bloody week of the culinary school she apparently attended. I attended the same program. BTW. Nope. She found a box of cornstarch and dumped the whole box in. Dry. Soup destroyed. Her shift ended shortly afterwards. Turns out I forgot to get her contact information at the beginning of the shift, so I had to message her on Facebook telling her not to bother ever returning. Classy, I know, but she was just one huge bloody mess I couldn't even begin to fix. Guy showed up for retail work, absolutely reeking of Jack Daniels. He had drunk so much the odor was apparently coming out of his skin. Despite him showering, I tried to give him a break and told him to come back the next day, but he just took that as another chance to get fricked up again. The following day, nothing had changed. I'm an employee who was fired on my first day. I got a job in a deli and worked one day from 7 AM until 3 PM. I was then told that it wouldn't work out. I had received almost no training at all that day and was left on my own to serve customers at one point. I didn't have the guts to say anything and just let it go. It happens a lot in gastronomy. Often restaurants will set up tryout sessions for new hires and use them as free cheap labor on busy shifts, then let them go. I managed a bookstore that had an auxiliary calendar kiosk at the other end of the shopping center. Hired a woman to man it, did her morning training, left her alone for a bit, went back to check on her and found half the calendars stolen and her asleep behind the curtains we used to hide back stock. I've never been so angry. Yes, I hired a woman to man something. How clever all of you are for making the exact same joke. Excellent work. Fired a 23-year intern on day 1 at our ad agency. Showed up to work in a hoodie and shorts, looking like he'd not even slept. During his IT orientation, he put his head down on the table and fell asleep. We asked him to go home and never come back. Turns out his dad was friends with a board member and already being from a well-off background, gave zero shoots about a $10 hour intern job in the first place. I was a corporate field manager for a big box camping store, and my job was to travel to new locations and help open new stores. This involved a lot of hiring, building, and stocking in a short amount of time. We're not in uniform when we're in the stocking phase, so it's common that no one knows who's who. There was a couple of girls that banded together and seemed to be splitting the work of one person while still managing to do it half as fast. I walked over and tried to give them friendly guidance and they didn't seem to respond positively. I came back an hour later and they didn't progress very far. When I told them that they needed to step up their game, one of them became aggressive and responded, "Or what? Who the frick do you think you are? Talking to me like that? You ain't my boss." She got right in my face like a world star video and acted like she was going to fight me. Apparently they had forgotten that I was one of the interviewers, although it was someone else who made the choice to hire them. I said, "Well, actually, I am." They looked mortified as I asked them to follow me. I took them into the office with my VP, and together we wished them well. They begged to keep their jobs and I had to explain that laziness is bad enough, but insubordination will not be tolerated, at which point they told me to frick myself and left. I worked at a hardware store in Texas and we hired a new girl to work the sales floor. I noticed she was acting weird at first but nothing too out of the ordinary. However, she was always working in one part of the store no matter what job I told her to do. Finally, after a couple hours, I decided to check the cameras to see what the frick she was up to, and it turns out she had been huffing cans of duster and putting them back on the shelf when she was done with them. Needless to say, her first day immediately became her last day. She couldn't figure out what the tab key was. It was a basic data entry job. Literally, see the names and addresses written on this paper? Copy it exactly into our system. That's IT. We went through an agency, which generally gives a software literacy test. Basic understanding of computers would be just fine. It's only data entry. She would stop typing after filling in a field, grab the mouse, and move it to the other field to type. We corrected her. It's a lot faster and easier if you just push tab to move between the fields. Several times, she would stop typing, cover her face with her hands, and say, "Oh, this is too much. This is too hard." Every time it was suggested to use tab to move between fields. She also got up from her desk, with her trainer manager sitting right next to her, and went into the bathroom to answer it every time her phone rang. 5 or so times throughout the day. The manager called the agency around noontime and told them we'd have her finish the day, but to ask her not to come back tomorrow. The agency called her right then and there on her cell phone, and of course she got up and went into the bathroom to take the call. She came back out and sat down at her desk like she was going to work, but instead just looked at the manager and said, "Can I just leave now then?" So awkward. Had to fire a high school kid because he wouldn't stop hitting on the female cashiers. I received multiple complaints on his first day. The best part was when his dad called, demanding an explanation. Training my lifeguards for the summer when one girl couldn't swim. The test can be strenuous if you haven't done any physical activity for a while, but this girl couldn't make it halfway across the pool without needing to be saved herself. Parents tried to sue for wrongful termination until we had then come watch her daughter start drowning a minute into the test. People. So I am a reporter and our interns come in and shadow us from time to time. This kid came in for his first shadowing with me and we were headed to a nicer event, one which required we wear nicer attire. He'd been asked by my editor not to wear jeans or shorts but to dress business casual, slacks and at least a nice button-up shirt or polo. Well, he showed up late, and he showed up in jeans and flip-flops. I didn't even ask my editor. I sent him home before he could walk into the event with me. Later I was honest with my editor about what happened. The intern did not return for a second day. I'd like to add I did not fire him. Simply sent him home after asking if he had a change of clothes and he told me no. I had to explain to my boss why the intern wasn't at the event with me. I have no idea if she fired him or if he simply chose not to show up again. Believe me, reporters don't make a ton of money and I know interns sure as heck don't. I worked my butt off for 2 years taking no pay or little pay journalism internships. I wasn't going to embarrass him or make him feel ashamed if he didn't own proper attire. If he did not, it would have been up to him to bring that to the editor's attention when she asked him to wear business casual attire. I know she certainly would not have embarrassed him or fired him if he didn't own the proper clothing. He started chopping out lines on the dashboard 5 minutes after leaving the shop. When I asked what the frick he thought he was doing, he said, "Don't worry, I'll share." And then he hogged it all for himself. Selfish prick deserved to be fired. Security supervisor at a hospital. At the end of my first day, the girl relieving me comes in 37 minutes late. She didn't know I was going to be there so she took her time getting there. She promises up and down that the next day she would be there on time. The next day she is no call no show. She was gainfully unemployed after that. I am a lifeguard and we take 30-minute rotations with 15-minute breaks. My manager has once told me that a guy came in first day and fell asleep on his first rotation so he was fired. I ran one of those calendar kiosks in my local mall as a second job for holiday money. Hiring was done by a temp agency located across the country, and the people sucked accordingly. 2 days after we opened, I was supposed to have a new guy to train. I got a call from him saying he'd been stabbed on the bus, and was in the hospital. I asked him which hospital, and he told me. I have a buddy who worked for the local police department. and I had him make a call for me. No such person in the hospital, and no stabbings on any bus line. I called the number I had for him, and his dad answered. I identified myself and explained that I was letting his son go from the job he had blown off. The dad was very polite, but as he hung up, I heard him screaming at his useless freaking son. I don't understand why he wouldn't make a more believable lie. Not an employer, but I did an in-house training course with some new hires. First day goes okay. One of them doesn't turn up on the second day, a Friday, or the following Monday. Turns out he had gone to Glastonbury Festival. He was asked to not come back after that. Amazingly, someone did something similar. Didn't turn up for first day of a training course with some fellow new hires. Main problem was they were all flown in from Malaysia to UK. Eventually found out she had some minor surgery scheduled, but didn't want to mention it in case she wasn't hired. Instead decided to keep quiet and just not turn up. Incredibly, it worked, and more training, and flights, and hotels were set up for her. She still worked there when I was made redundant to cut costs. Purchased 6 songs on iTunes with the company credit card less than an hour after we issued it to him. There's no way that's a business expense. One woman didn't even make it to the interview. She came to the office and was told to wait in the hallway for the manager to call for her. She promptly started to wander around the office, peeking into rooms, people's screens, and randomly pick up and examine stuff. She was an RPG protagonist. The fastest turnaround I've ever seen was this guy we hired in support at a tech company. Everyone knew that the structure of our network wasn't ideal, but it worked and we didn't have the resources to fix it. We showed the guy the network diagram and told him this. He immediately declared it unacceptable and marched down to the network manager's office and started listing off all the reasons why the network was wrong. Yeah, you don't lecture the king neckbird on the first day, and sure as heck not when you're the lowest level peon in the company. He was politely told to get the frick out less than 4 hours into his first day. King neckbird. LOL'd. I have a story. Although I was the employee at the time, I'd been laid off from a hospital job I'd had for 6 years. Put applications out every. Domino's is the first to call back, so I go for the interview and the manager guy hires me. I tell him though that I need a spot working inside the store and not delivery as my car isn't reliable at the moment. He says no problem. I do the training and it's my first day on the job. I show up and I am told to go on a few deliveries with one of the drivers in their car. Okay. After we deliver a few pizzas, the manager says okay, time for you to head out on your own. I remind him about our discussion about how I can't do deliveries at the moment, and he just says, well, drivers are what I need. If you can't do that, then I'll have to let you go. Come to find out, my friend's wife worked there and at the time was cheating on him with the manager. She recognized me during training and apparently told him he can't work here. He might find out about us and tell my husband. Please tell me that you told the husband. I was 13 and secured my first job at a pet supply company called Paws. After my first day we were all done cleaning up the store, so we all milked the clock for the last 10 minutes sitting around chatting it up. The topic of my age came up and I told them I was only 13. I didn't know it was illegal at the time and the job required you be 18 to work there because it was a warehouse environment. The next morning I came to work on time and was pulled into the office. I was told I couldn't work there because I was underage. I walked 3 miles home crying like a little bee because I thought I was fired for underperforming. You must have looked very old for your age. Friend of mine got a job at Chipotle as a cook. Got drunk the night before his first day and was hungover at work the next day. He threw up in the bathroom for most of his first shift. Didn't go back after that, wasn't asked to come back. The only one I felt horrible about. I was training the guy. Didn't do the firing. On his lunch break he was caught walking out 2 rolls of toilet paper to his car. Explained he couldn't afford any right now. Manager took the rolls. Fired him on the spot. It's justifiable. If you'll steal TP you'll steal something else, but dude, I would have let you borrow some cash to get by if you asked. I'm a teacher. I was on a committee to hire a new 5th grade teacher. I was showing her the ropes and monitoring her in-class behavior. I watched this bonehead tell a student, I don't like you very much. Figure it out yourself. The next thing I showed her was the door. In the exit interview, had on the walk to the door, I demanded an explanation and she said of the student she didn't like. She said he was wearing designer jeans. You know his life is all peaches and cream. Taking from us little guys. I say, did he make an inappropriate comment to you about money? She says number. But I know they're kind. TL. DR. 30-year-old woman was classist against a 10-year-old. I had an employee who worked for a week. He went to a comedy club, ordered $60 worth of food and booze. When he couldn't pay, he asked if they would charge it to the company he works for, which they declined. The manager of the comedy club called me the next day to talk it over with me. I told him to go pay it that day, since it was payday. He didn't pay them. I fired him the next day. He went to a comedy club, ordered $60 worth of food and booze. I can't believe he only got one beer and a pretzel at the comedy club. Not quite first day, but handful of folks had just started before big company meeting. Long story short, one guy had logged into the customer database in the hotel at the meeting and was skimming people's info as hard as he could, while high out of his mind on M or something. Opened 2 restaurants as a side business 6 years ago. Fired a staff on his first week because whenever I was sitting down eating my lunch, which I paid for, he thought it was classy to sit in front of me and just steal part of my food. Before firing him, I asked his fellow colleagues, and seems he did this regularly with our kitchen supplies and once with a customer he tried to hook up with. I had a small consulting company with 3 other guys. We'd busted our asses for almost 3 years to get a good reputation and expand. We scored a new contract, and we were already at 100%, so we started looking around, and hired someone who had a good reputation and appeared to have the right skills. We briefed the guy on the customer and project, shared documentation, and sent him to the customer site, alone, to start the job. We got a call from the customer at 11 AM, asking us why the new guy was redesigning the solution we had agreed on. Apparently the new guy didn't even make it to 40 minutes before telling everyone that the design was crap, and that it needed to be redone from the ground up. We called him at noon, asked him to explain himself, then fired him and told him that he'd be paid for the full day if he just packed up and left immediately. New rule, never bring a new hire on site unescorted. Workers of Reddit, what is your best I'm getting fired moments at work? What were the consequences? I worked tech support for my university's School of Engineering. It was late, and I was in the labs doing homework with people. After I finished, I was just wandering the halls because I was bored. One of my co-workers left his ID in a classroom. We use our IDs to unlock each classroom, so I had to let him in. Usually, we only have to slide our wallet over this black box, and if our ID is in there, it will unlock. I decided that since my wallet is in my back pocket, all I'd have to do is put my butt up against the wall, and the door would open. It was a little high, so I had to jump. I took a step, jumped up, spun around to scan my butt, and immediately put both feet through the drywall. I stuck the landing, made eye contact with the other employee, and walked away. I came back, slid a wet floor sign in front of the holes I made and put in a work order to have them filled. They were filled, and nobody besides me and that co-worker ever knew I did it. I still work there. My dad does that with the little stand thing outside his office. It's hilarious seeing a 50-something-year-old guy carrying a bunch of books do a little hop and slam his butt into the scanner, then just calmly walk into the building. I worked for a privately owned restaurant deli. The owners were married and terrible people. I would get a phone call and be demanded to work in the next few hours on threat of being fired if I quit. Anyways, one day I got in a big deal of trouble for giving a customer double meat without charging him. Now I don't mean a talking to in the back office, I mean full on being screamed at in front of customers. Anyways, after I backtalked, I was let go in front of a line of prospective buyers. As I walked put of the store, I looked over my shoulder and proudly said to my bosses I pooped in the cookie dough. This was a lie, but they didn't know it. We had a huge vat of it in the back. Our cookies were very popular, so it was a big deal to them. My co-worker eventually told me, and the husband and wife devil duo looked through the door and couldn't tell what was chocolate chip and what was my poop. Even though I never actually did it, they threw out the whole vat $500 1000. Felt good. On threat of being fired if I didn't show up. I don't know how quit got in there. On threat of being fired if I quit. Line cook at a restaurant. One of my managers was a black lady and we would rib on each other about ethnicities. I'm half Mexican. And one day she says America loves Mexicans more than black people. I said balls. We have to sneak our way across the border any way we can. And you all got a free cruise. She got a blank expression on her face. I looked at the guy next to me and he had the "well it's been nice having you around" look on his face. I look back at her and just grin because that's all I can do at this point. She slowly reaches out her hand and gives me a fist bump and commends me on my comeback. Didn't get fired. It did close down later though. Oh well. Worked at a pet store. Manager asked me to move a koi from one tank to another. Big giant $100 koi. Rips through the net. Lands head first on the ground and flops twice before dying. Manager and I made eye contact and all he said was, "That's the first one I bought when I started the store." His name was Patches. He went into the office and gently closed the door. I grabbed my jacket, waved to the others and left. Patches, just what the net needed. I work at a university. A vice president brought a minority student to my office. Said minority student complained that I had refused to help him because I was xenophobic. I'd actually denied the student's request because, as I'd explained to the student earlier, I wasn't permitted to fulfill his request as he hadn't paid to join the program that gave him access to what he wanted. He had thanked me for checking things out for him and answering his questions and then left. So I was quite surprised when he came back with an irate vice president in tow. I made an exception at the vice president's request, and then spent 3 very tense days explaining my actions to my boss and her boss. It led to my boss having a meeting with the helpful vice president about why we couldn't issue $1,000 pieces of equipment to people who hadn't paid us any money for the use of them, and why my department heads didn't feel like they should fire me for following department policies. I think the shittiest part of this is that the guy got what he wanted by pulling the race card, thereby reinforcing the behavior and encouraging him to do it more. I highly doubt he even thought you was xenophobic, but I'm sure he has taken advantage of white guilt in that way before. Worked at Blockbuster. Someone apparently had paid with a $10 bill, and I gave them 80 some odd dollars and change. My till was almost $90 short that night. Found the transaction. Found the account it was tied to. Tried calling to plead for mercy. Number is disconnected. Manager is a good friend of mine. He says, "Well, I'll leave a note for store manager. He'll want to talk to you tomorrow." I come in the next morning, and store manager is there. Really quiet, really focused, very polite, but I can tell something is on his mind. An hour goes by and we work in relative silence. 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and then I go to lunch. I come back, ready to face the music. "So, am I fired or what?" Store manager gives me a weird look. "What? Why would you be fired?" I take a deep breath and say, "Because of how short I came up last night. We tried to get in touch with the customer. We even took the register apart in case we made a mistake." "Wait," he says. "What happened?" Turns out, either the note didn't get left, or he didn't find it. He calls the manager from the previous night. She tells him about it. He comes out of the back office like 15 minutes later and says, "Look, any other day, I would have written you up. You wouldn't have been fired. Everyone makes mistakes. But since you owned up to it, I'm gonna just say a mistake got made and leave it at that." And a sigh of relief from me. So, I work at a bank. Within my first 2 weeks, I left my money out. Now, normally, if the drawer was locked, it wouldn't be a big deal, but I didn't do that. I just left a pile of cash, roughly valued at $20,000, in 2 drawers out for an entire freaking weekend. And nobody found it, from Friday morning to Monday evening. Used to work at a bank. I promise you are not the first, or last, to do this. I was working in a movie theater and we found a phone inside. It was a flip phone, nothing special. We kept a hold of it until the owner claimed it, and for some bonehead reason, I decided to take a picture of my dong on it. Made it the background photo, so whenever someone unsuspecting opened it up, bam, there's my dong. Co-workers thought it was hilarious and wanted to see it too. Next day we're all preparing for work when our manager comes in and says, "Alright, WHO did it," and looks around at us. I feign ignorance and ask who did what. He replied the dong. Who took a picture of their dong and put it on the phone. I denied it was me and everyone else kept mum. Later on that day he approached me privately, pun intended, and said he knew it was me. Knowing I couldn't hide it anymore, I questioned him as to how he knew it was me, and he explained that the background made him realize it was taken in the employee restroom and he narrowed it down from there. Holy crap, I felt bad, but he gave me a pat on the back and told me never to do it again, and I somehow kept my job. TLDR. My boss went CSI on a picture of my dong. He was bluffing. He told everyone he knew it was them, and you admitted it. Forgot to secure a $10,000 machine I was transporting with the truck and bam, machine fell in the middle of the street, pieces everywhere, causing a bit of traffic. But luckily I'm the boss so I can't really fire myself. We all agreed it was extremely stupid. The female chef at my job was, for some reason, allowed to have her 11-year-old son running around in the restaurant. He was the most obnoxious 11-year-old you can imagine, and I know they can be obnoxious. He thought because I was a waiter and his mother was a chef he was my supervisor. One day I had been taking a cup of coffee in the back and I heard customers coming in. I walk through the kitchen to the reception and halfway there the kid runs into me and says, "Why weren't you working?" And I just freaking lost it and yelled, "Shut the frick up and let Emmy work," and walk out to the reception. I plastered on a smile and hoped the customers didn't hear me. They'd heard me, and I did my best to explain to them that there was a kid around and I did not apply for a job as a babysitter and gave them as good of a service as I could. I thought this was the point at which my temper would finally catch up to me, but it turns out that the chef did not hear and my boss was out on town to do business stuff or something. I can't believe I managed to keep that job. Not me, but a coworker. I worked at a grocery store and one of my coworkers was gathering shopping carts outside. He was just minding his own business when, out of nowhere, some cops pulled up. They got out, put him in handcuffs, then proceeded to throw him in the car. Last I saw of him, I can imagine him seeing them and thinking, "Damn it." I walk into the liquor shop where I worked for a few years and there's some clown behind the register. Turns out he's the new owner. Old owner decided to let us figure it out the hard way that we were out of a job. But a few years ago I was reading The Road by Cormac McCarthy while on my lunch break. Highly recommend. BTW. At one point I came across a word I was unfamiliar with. The context in which it was used gave me no clue as to what it could have meant. This was before I had a smartphone. So I wrote the word down and decided to look it up online when I got back to the office. The word was catamite. Wait until you're at home to look it up if you don't know what it is. Explaining why I googled it was rather awkward, but I did not lose my job, fortunately. Ancient usage. A boy kept 4 gay practices. Modern usage. The passive partner and riding back doors. I found a hurt owl on my way to work. It was stunned so I was able to pick it up. Another car stopped too, when they saw what I was doing and gave me a trash bag. I put the owl in the trash bag and put it in the trunk of my car. I called a raptor rescue and told them about the owl and said I could bring it after work. But they said I should keep an eye on it, in case it takes a turn for the worst. So I had no choice but to bring the owl into my office. I transferred it to a printer box. One time when I went to check on it, it had recovered and flew around the entire floor of my office. It was amazing. Its wingspan was nearly 5 feet and people could see its shadow move across their desk as it flew. It promptly crapped on my friend's file cabinet and landed on his cube wall. I ran to get it but it flew away again and did another lap around the floor. Finally I was able to grab the bird and place it back in the box. The VP was to say the least not pleased. I thought for sure that was my last day at the company. No one ever said a word to me. But from that day forward I quit bringing any wild or tame. Used to bring my dog into work before his grooming apt animals into work. At that year's Christmas party they sang the 12 Days of Christmas with the chorus and an owl flying in distress. This was many years ago working tech support sales for the up and coming GoDaddy.com. I'm on a call with a customer who needs to reset her password. Since it's very difficult to turn a password reset call into a sale, we were required to wrap them up under 10 minutes. This woman is awful, doesn't follow directions and is completely computer illiterate. 30 minutes into the call, and I'm still trying to explain the concept of highlighting text with her mouse, and my supervisor comes over to ask what the heck is taking so long. Frustrated and aggravated, I mash the mute button, and once the light turns red, I turn to him and say, "Sorry, this lady is a freaking idiot." There is a brief moment of silence. I recall my supervisor's face morphing into a grin of understanding, when suddenly I hear in my headset, "What? Scumbag mute button." Worst part is, if I had just called her an idiot without the adjective, I would have gotten off with a warning. There's a strict no swearing policy on the phone floor that no one, even the managers, followed. However, in the rare and unlikely case a customer heard you curse, you were fired without question. I worked at a call center and was joking around with a friend of mine. She had just engaged in a relationship with another girl and was complaining that the fricking wasn't very good, making jokes, and saying that she wanted to play with her new girlfriend's butt but her girlfriend was having none of it. Off mute. Without missing a beat, I just looked my friend and said, "So, you like butt play, do you?" And then, slowly, quietly, I hear the customer's voice, "You're off mute, just so you know." I went pale. As soon as the call was done, I approached my supervisor, who was and still is cool as heck. I've left there but we still play games together all the time, and gave him a heads up in case a manager approaches him about it. Thankfully, it looks like the call went by unnoticed, in a time where we were having 20-25 calls a week listened to, and I only took about 10 a day, and I wasn't fired. Worked third shift at a cafe in downtown Milwaukee, and at around 3:30 the cops come in and I comp them their drinks and food, per usual. Since my only other clientele typically consisted of the homeless, sickheads, or a combo of both, I ask the cops to watch the place so I can take the trash out back and smoke a cigarette. This, again, was our usual routine. So I grab the trash, head out back, and light up my usual 3 AM joint. As I'm standing there in the alley, this guy comes around the corner from the Riverwalk and I hold my breath and hide the J behind me, hoping he'll just keep walking. No. He stops right in front of me, looks at me, and holy crap, it's the owner of the cafe, plus about 4 or 5 other major restaurants in town. If any of you have ever worked in food service in Milwaukee, you'll probably know who I'm talking about. Anyway, he's right in front of me and he asks, "Don't you work for me here at business name?" "Yes," I say as I exhale a hit right in his face. "Who's inside then?" "The cops. And they've been comped and are watching the place?" "Yes sir." "Great, let me hit that." I hand it over to him and he hits it and compliments me on my taste in weed. We stand there, smoking the J, talking about restaurants and whatnot. At the end, before I go back inside, he offers me a job as a waiter at his steakhouse, starting as soon as he's able to replace me at the cafe. Long story short, I went from making $7.25 an hour serving sickheads who wanted a warm place to stay the night, to making around $250 a night in tips. It was pretty freaking sweet. And schools say drugs get you nowhere. My supervisor has had it in for me for a while now. Tries every little thing he can to get me written up with HR and put me on a PIP, performance improvement plan. One step away from being fired. Ultimate goal for him is to replace me with an H-1B at a lower salary. Luckily at my age, I'm seasoned, and I know how to deal with these sort of things. One of our co-workers had brought a juice maker into work. Someone used it and just let fruit pulp dry on it. She was mad, left a note for the culprit to clean it. Same day, someone steals a slice of my pizza from the fridge. So it's the end of the day, I wash her juicer and write a funny snarky note. Next day is all high fives from everyone in the company. Everyone saw the note and thought it was hilarious. So I take a picture of it and put it up on my Facebook. Friends all like it too. I get an email CC'd to me and HR. "Toka, you have violated the company's social media policy and will be written up by HR." A screenshot of my Facebook post was attached. Thing is, profile is completely private. He must be one of those fake friends on my profile. I asked him, what did I specifically violate? Pro tip, always ask for specifics. Don't let them vaguely accuse you of violating a policy. You gave the impression that our company is full of pizza thieves. A few months earlier I had browsed his Facebook. Of interest was a post he made I hate the nepotism at work. I made my screenshot, sent it to HR and sat down with the director. My Facebook settings are private, so there's no way he could have gotten that screenshot without being a fake friend. Is he doing this to all the people in our department? Because if he isn't, I'm being singled out. If my profile is private and he's creating fake users, isn't he violating my privacy? Also, we have to apply weight to the comments. He's a director. I'm a peon. Whose position carries more weight? Continuing with weight. Whose comment is more damaging to the company reputation? My complaining about a missing pizza slice, or his complaining about rampant nepotism? Finally, what is a judge going to say if you fire me over a pizza note? He was absolutely livid, but I was right. There was nothing HR could do about it unless they wanted to write him up too. Good guys win sometimes. I feel like maybe you should have had him checked out by HR. Creepy male boss put his arms around me during an outing. I automatically shrugged him off. Consequences? Well, a few weeks later, I started overhearing rumors that my clients were complaining about my job performance. I haven't gotten any complaints from or had serious problems with any, so that was odd. Then, my $3 million client got transferred to my co-worker who's always had his tongue shoved deep in that creepy boss butt. Things turned out great though. I was lucky since another boss who's frequently in competition with him decided to take a gamble and absorb me into his team. His gamble paid off. Creepy boss tried getting rid of another new employee. The guy was a seasoned hire. Refused to suck up. The CEO was confused since the guy has lost 4 people in a team of 2 in just 3 years, and if he got rid of that guy, it'll be 5 within 3 years. Since I was the only employee he got rid of that's still in the bank, he asked about my job performance. This happened in a meeting where he's off on vacation and can't defend himself for about 2 weeks. The other unit heads smelled the blood and quickly bullshitted praises about me. They told the CEO I was a genius. Clients adored me. Several operations heads lovingly talked about how popular I was with operations, and like most relationship managers, the treasury head talked about how he spotted my talent in my first year and everyone was so upset he lost the bid to absorb me into his team. Basically tons of bulls. The CEO came to the conclusion that this guy sucked as a boss and only got to where he is through tons of butt licking. I got to know all this because my boss was so gleeful about the backstabbing session. He couldn't resist gloating to me when creepy boss mentioned another big bank wanted him, trying to negotiate for a counteroffer. The CEO just said, "They want you. You will not be on my list of people to poach." The CEO's secretary loves to gossip and told everyone. He didn't get a counteroffer and had to leave. To be fair, the place you work at sounds crappy as far as work environment. I worked for a real estate company one summer during college. They owned a big, old boarding house, and unbeknownst to my employer I got my best friend to rent a room there during the summer. There were pretty strict rules, but not many of the rooms were rented out, so we ignored those. Had people over late, partied outside. You know the drill. One late night a bunch of us were on the back porch wasted, smoking pot, yelling, having a great time. All of a sudden a car came peeling into the driveway and I thought through my drunken and high haze, that looks a lot like my boss wife's car. Next thing I know my boss wife, P as all heck, comes stomping up to us so livid I was literally scared for my life. She hadn't recognized me yet because there were about 10 of us, and I was holding a beer and a blunt. So I tried to slip away quietly, but as soon as I moved we locked eyes. She said, in the most P voice I have ever heard, that freaking better not be rules about the cookies, and because I was pretty much exhaling pot smoke in her direction as the words left her lips, I pretty much knew my time with that rental company was over. What's the craziest reason you had to fire someone? I was a bar manager. This guy came in one night and said he was an aspiring DJ and asked if we would consider hiring him to come in just on Sunday nights to DJ for us. He said we wouldn't have to pay him at first. He would just take tips and we could renegotiate after he helped to build up our Sunday night crowd. He lasted less than 3 months. He drove away so much business and I got so many complaints. He played the same songs every week, and when people made requests for commonly known songs, he had no idea who the musicians, were. I had to fire someone who was working for free. He was a nice guy, which is the only reason he lasted as long as he did. This is both sad and hilarious at the same time. Not my personal experience, but one fellow contractor had a safety guy for 6 months. One weekend he took a trip out of town for non-work related reasons, but used the company truck and charged it all on the company credit card. On his way up there he ran a random person off the road, who just so happened to be one of the owners of another contractor who works closely with the one who employed this guy. Shortly after he was fired, and I'm sure criminal charges were being brought against him. A couple weeks later his wife calls his former employer saying he had called her randomly and killed himself in his truck on the side of the highway. Me and another colleague went searching for records of this guy. Couldn't find anything, no claims of a suicide in the local paper where he supposedly killed himself at. Thought it was weird, but whatever. It turns out this guy falsified all his qualifications and job experience. Fast forward a month later, and I heard through the grapevine that the original contractor who had employed this guy received a call from some contractor across country because he applied for work there and put them down as his previous employer. He faked his own death to get out of trouble with the company, then proceeded to put them down on his resume, not expecting anyone to check his references. LOL. It astounds me how people in the construction industry don't think anyone knows anyone, or that their reputation will in fact get around. Everyone knows everyone. He also sounds like someone I worked with previously who got fired for similar reasons, as well as being a racist, sexist jerk. I work for a hotel. Had to fire 2 separate employees on 2 different occasions for letting people in vacant rooms to smoke crack and steal from the rooms. Had an employee that was going to get fired for simply showing up late constantly with no legit reason. During the term meeting she tells me another employee cut the brake lines in her car. It's obvious this was to save her from being fired. She didn't realize that something like that gets cops involved. She was termed, and then detectives showed up to her house to get statements. Of course, no evidence of lines being cut, and now she's dealing with police for making false statements. Fired a high schooler because his girlfriend kept showing up and they would disappear behind the racks. I told him his girlfriend was banned trying to not fire him and she kept sneaking back. Worked in an office and they hired a girl from a temp agency to help me. She wouldn't do anything unless I walked her through each step after telling her she had to do it. Hey, an estimate just arrived on the fax right next to you. Complete the quote and send it back. Come to find out she was playing Spider and Solitaire on her computer. She was also sneaking out back in the warehouse. Guys thought she was doing drugs. I told my boss get rid of her. I would rather work alone than babysit her, so he called the temp agency and told them to stop sending her. She showed up the next day, so boss sent her home and called the agency saying, hey, she is useless, stop sending her. She showed up again the next day. This went on for over a week. The people at the temp agency said they told her to stop showing, but she kept coming in every morning, mind you usually 10 to 20 minutes late. My boss wouldn't say anything to her face, so finally I said, hey, we can't afford to pay you, so we had to let you go through the temp agency. They should have told you. She was all, oh, I thought they were joking. I was so glad she was gone. Imagine being so useless that working alone is literally easier. Years ago, at a lumber company, had a guy, less than 2 hours after he started on his first day, pick up his car with a forklift and stand underneath it to see what was rattling when he drove. Turned out it was his brain. His head wasn't screwed on tight. During my summer job when I was in college, I had a shift with this guy who didn't show up. I didn't have his number, so I asked my boss to look into it. He gets back to me a little later and says the guy is on his way, should be there in about 5-10 minutes. 45 minutes later the guy still hasn't shown up, so I text my boss again, and he gets back to me a little later and says he's certain the guy should be there any minute, but he still doesn't show up. This continues until the end of the shift, and the guy still isn't here. Closing took a little longer than normal because I was on my own, so I was still working half an hour after my shift was supposed to be over, when this guy strolls in with his girlfriend. He half-heartedly helps for a little while, in between chatting with his girlfriend, before saying he's got some important family dinner and he has to leave. Apparently that wasn't even the first time this had happened, but amazingly this wasn't what got him fired. What finally did it was a couple weeks later when we had a staff meeting. My boss had an open shift that he needed someone to fill, and this guy volunteers. So my boss, in front of all the staff, has the following conversation. You want to work this shift? Yes. Are you sure you're available to work this shift? Yes. So that means that you'll be at location, at time, on day? Yes. Then he still didn't show up. Some people, man. A guy shaved, trimmed off his pubes and left them scattered across a shared desk in a shared office. When confronted, he pulled a George Costanza. Oh, is that frowned upon? Yes. Not too crazy, more stupid than crazy. One of the programmers on my team was sitting at his desk looking at P, and this is cubicle land, no offices. My director walked into the area to talk to me and saw it. Then it was the first thing he told me about, so I got up and walked over for a look myself, and there it was. Me and the director looked at each and I said, I gotta take care of this. So we walked back to HR. I told them what was going on and what we saw, and they told me to fire him. So I did. He lost a $110K job for looking at P on his computer at work. If I look at P, I want to whack one off. Work really isn't the place for it. We had someone fall asleep at his desk with a lit cigarette in his hand. In an office full of cubicles like maybe 6-7 years ago, smoking wasn't legal anywhere indoors, let alone in an office building LMAO. And the first time he wasn't even fired. He was fired when it happened again. Had a guy on my team start smoking a cigarette at his desk. He was diabetic, and when confronted it was clear he was low on blood sugar. A soda later and he was quickly himself. I work at an art studio where we teach classes and sell pottery that our artists make for others to paint. I'm one of the artists and the manager. I started getting a funny feeling about one of my employees. She wasn't doing anything blatantly wrong, just seemed to work really slowly sometimes, request insignificant but kinda odd schedule changes, and have different break habits from the other staff. I started feeling like she was stealing, but this is a really small business so I didn't have her on camera or any way to really prove it, until she accidentally sent me a video of herself painting pieces that I made from her home. What an idiot. CEO ordered me to fire one of my interns because he was trying to hit on one of the other interns the CEO had the hots for. Fired a guy for looking to pay someone to cast black magic on the owner and the owner's family to bewitch them into giving him a raise, and, ironically, never firing him. Only reason I found out was because he asked someone else in the office for help in finding a witch doctor to cast the spells and word got round. No one wanted to be in the same room as him after that. When I confronted him he said the devil made him do it so it wasn't his fault. I live in the Middle East. I definitely did not wake up expecting to fire someone for black magic that day. Side note, practicing black magic is literally a death sentence here. He's gonna post about firing his witch doctor. At a retail job, we had a kid come in and punch in for the day then go home, would come back at quit-in time and punch out. We use separate attendance and pay software. We had someone punch into the pay software at 5 AM, go home, come back and work his scheduled 5 PM to 10 PM, and clock out at 10 PM. Opening and closing crew aren't too familiar with each other, so he wasn't caught until Big Boss, who is normally a mid, came in early one day and saw him doing it. They stole a $3 bottle of wine that could have easily put on the house check for employees. Prep cook stole a 25-pound bag of onions. Expensive $3 bottle of wine. The guy had somehow hung on by the skin of his teeth when caught making plastic model funny cars at his desk. Pro tip. Throwing a newspaper over the model doesn't hide the smell of the glue, but when a client called complaining about our hero trying to sell him golf clubs out of the trunk of his car, he was gone. Hoo boy, I'd have to go with a guy who in the span of 24 hours started a fist fight with another employee, on camera, with witnesses, then called the police and said the other guy did it, trying to press charges. I just sent the video. Trespassed on the property the following day and slurred at my boss, on camera, with witnesses, then called the police and said my boss did it. I just sent the video, hurt himself somehow and went to the hospital, where he told the doctor he'd been attacked at work. Doc found no injury consistent with his story and well yeah, camera. I am a chef at an upscale restaurant. The sauté cook has a lobster dish on his station that involves a technique called deglazing that involves alcohol, so in turn the pan catches on fire briefly and flames up. When you do it correctly, hard to do it incorrect. The alcohol is cooked off and the flame goes out. Every time he made this dish he would deglaze the pan, catch it on fire and then blow it out, blowing his own germs and nastiness all over someone's food and everything in the blast radius. That was a week ago. Fired him after he did it multiple times after being asked not to. Maybe it's because of the current state of affairs, but I couldn't believe a trained cook would do that. I am a mere prep cook decent line experience, and I can't believe someone would do that, pandemic or not. It's just not what you do. It's like cutting cheese into tiny pieces instead of using a grater. One of my nurses was chasing another down the hall with a scalpel in her hand screaming at the top of her lungs, "I'm going to cut you, B." In the early 2000s I managed a coffee shop that required the customers' names to be put on the cup. One guy looked like he was doing it, but upon closer inspection on some cups he was writing an IP address. Turns out he was running an illegal sports book out of the shop. He did quit before I had to technically fire him because he found out I knew. He worked at the company for 2 weeks. Came to the Christmas party on Friday, got crap-faced, told the HR manager that she was a S and would die alone. They had some previous vaguely romantic history, went on a couple of dates or something, tried to fight 2 of the customer service managers who asked him to calm down, and while being escorted out he turned to the CEO and COO and told them to go. He showed up to work on the Monday talking about how fun the party was and how he had seen some people who would probably be called into HR that morning. He was the first and only employee to be called and was sacked on the spot. Some Todd Packer energy there. I didn't do the firing, but a company I worked for was growing rapidly and needed people quickly. So, they weren't too picky in who they hired. They hired this one guy, Rick, who was kind of strange. Seemed harmless enough, but he was just kind of weird and socially awkward. He started off okay, but after a couple of months, his work started trailing off. His supervisor spoke to him to find out why, thinking maybe something at home was going on or there was some other issue. Rick said all was okay and left it at that. However, there was no change in his work. Long story short, the LAN guys started looking into his computer usage and found that he was trying to log into P sites at work all day long and being repeatedly thwarted by the firewall. Then he started doing searches on how to get around the firewall, then tried getting around the firewall and then tried logging into the P sites again. He did all of this on his work issued computer on the company's network on company time. Yes, after that all came to light, he was quickly shown the door for misuse of company property. Looking back, I kind of feel sorry for him. I'm guessing he was either just that stupid or battling some kind of P addiction, if he couldn't abstain for 40 hours per week. Had to fire a guy for coming to work high on M and getting lost in a closet while painting it. Asked what the deal was and was told I am having a conversation. That was his last day on Mayo. He got lost in Narnia. Once I had a guy call in sick to his restaurant bar shift right before his shift and then proceeded to show up crap-faced drunk for happy hour during the time he was supposed to be working. He was not a bright man. I work construction, and one of the subs gave me an invoice with no receipts. Turns out he wanted $30K for 4 weeks of work without paying the companies he rented equipment dumpsters from. I paid off the companies he owed money to and told him to frick off. Sad part is he's probably out there still doing the same thing. I worked at a retail store and found one of my co-workers was using the company iPad that we used to play music and order lunches to go on Craigslist and search for hookups. She didn't even bother to delete the search history. Not me, but my dad. He has a small handyman company with less than a handful of employees. His tools somehow have the habit of growing legs when he's at construction sites, so he rigorously writes his name on everything with permanent marker. One day, shortly after he hired someone new, his folding ruler is missing. He asks around if anyone has seen his folding ruler, but that doesn't seem to be the case. He doesn't think much of it. Sometimes things get lost. The next day he sees the new hire with a familiar looking folding ruler. He asks him to see it. New hire refuses. Dad tells him that he's his boss and insists he shows him the ruler. He complies under pressure. Sure enough, there's my dad's name on it in capital and bold letters. Now that could have been an honest mistake and there probably wouldn't have been any repercussions if he simply said, "Oh, my bad. Must have put the wrong one in my pocket. Here's your ruler." But the new hire insisted that this was his ruler and that the name on the side of it wasn't my dad's handwriting but rather a note the new hire had written on it himself to remember my dad's name. What makes it even more stupid is that my dad's company pays for the tools of his employees. He could have simply asked for a folding ruler and my dad would have given him one for free, but no. He needs to steal the boss's folding ruler and give the stupidest lie imaginable as an excuse. Profanity-filled road rage ran through an ambulance PA system at a crowded intersection. I had complaints coming in for well over a month. I feel that an ambulance should be allowed to chew you out over the PA for crap driving. When I was a bank teller, a fellow teller got fired for stuffing her purse with a strap of $100s every day, $10,000. Here's the interesting part. She always put the strap back into her teller drawer at the end of the day. She did this for months and months apparently without anyone noticing. But when the camera auditors finally did catch it, she was confronted and fired. When they asked her why she put a strap of money in her purse each day but always put it back, she said that if the bank were ever robbed then she could just take the money home because everybody would have assumed it was taken by the robber. Holy crap. 300 IQ crime. Used to work at a laser tag facility. It was mostly high schoolers who worked there. One guy had only been working there a couple months when he came in on a field trip with some classmates, including his girlfriend. He thought it would be a good idea to sneak his girlfriend into the fog room inside the maze during their game, have sex, then brag about it to the management team. Underage sex at work is, and surprisingly, not something you should be engaging in, and definitely not something you should be publicizing. We'd also hold these overnight events where you'd come in from midnight to 6 AM and play all night long. Had a guy show up reeking of booze and clearly high on C to work that shift. He got fired on the spot, and I'd occasionally run into him on the bus afterwards. Man, that was the best job though. I have so many insane stories from those times. I worked at a pet store and was the lead cashier, so I had to train this girl who didn't think she had to abide by the uniform because it's just store name and doesn't count as a real job. That was a warning that despite her thinking she did need to follow the uniform rules. Then when ringing up customers she actually told customers they couldn't buy certain items because we were running low and she planned on getting a pet soon and wanted these items. I apologized and rung them up. Second warning with me explaining how that's not how it works and she could shop when she's off the clock. Finally my manager fired her when she tried to steal one of the cats that were up for adoption after being told she needed to wait for approval after they do a home visit and make sure she can care for the cat. Her excuse for trying to steal the cat? Her landlord doesn't allow pets so she wouldn't be approved and she'd be a much better pet parent than anyone else who wanted the cat and much better than any of the customers we got. The girl didn't even last a week. I'm training a new girl. We're sitting at a computer together. The whole time I'm training her, she's scanning the perimeter around her. She's asking about this guy. Is he single? What about that guy? She's paying very little to no attention to what I'm telling her about, you know, the job. She's not even looking at what I'm doing as I'm demonstrating the work to her. She's rubbernecking every male who walks past. At first I was nice. Okay, did you see what I just did there? Now when this happens, we do that. etc etc. Her eyes were glazed over. She wasn't absorbing anything. I could tell. Nice wasn't working. After a time, I said to her very sharply, "Are you here to work? Or are you here looking for a boyfriend? Because if you're not here to work, I'm going to need to find someone else for this job." I had hiring authority. That snapped her into reality for about 15 minutes. I finally said it's break time. She smiled and said, "I'm going to go up to the 4th floor and see if there's any fresh meat up there." After break time, I sent her into the fax room to collect some faxes I needed. The mail guy was in there changing rolls of fax paper. He came out of the mail room and said, "I think there's something wrong with your new girl." He was very nervous. I said, "What happened?" Apparently she was in the fax room, which tended to get hot because of all the machines in there. She had perched her butt up on the edge of the table, hiked her dress up to where her underwear was showing, arched her back, unbuttoned the front of her dress, and fanned herself with the sheaf of fax pages and said, "Oh, it's just so hot in here." Yeah, like that. Like the opening of a porno. I totally believed him. I believed she did that. 100%. She totally did that. I called her temp agency and said she's not working out. I think this was under 2 hours. I have stories about temps for days lol. I would like to subscribe to temp stories. Harassment. He harassed virtually every person in the department on sexual, racial and religious grounds. Human resources put up a fight while I had people crying and quitting because of him. I worked with a guy like this when I was still in high school. So many of us complained about him to the boss owner, but he continued to let it slide for months. I put up with it till after school ended, then finally quit along with 2 other people. The main boss owner proceeded to say we had been immature about the whole thing. When I was working at Burger King, our restaurant manager was away on maternity leave, so we had someone from another store come in over that time to fill the role. He ended up hiring someone who had worked there 5-6 years previously. High turnover, so a lot of hiring leaving. The few staff that had known her before she'd left hated her, but had no idea why she left. She even passed all the checks from head office before she was hired. Restaurant manager comes back about a month after she's been hired, takes one look at her, and rages. Like my RM is yelling at this girl, she's yelling at the manager that hired her, and all the crew that had known her when she was here last. Obviously none of us knew what was going on, but it turns out this girl hadn't left, she'd been fired, and management at the time hadn't told anyone that, just that she'd quit. This girl had scammed BK by pretending to be pregnant, fake ultrasounds, planes, baby shower, the whole lot, and then took paid maternity leave so she could go work somewhere else, because it was seasonal work with better pay, with the idea of having a job for the off season to come back to. I have no idea how she got through the head office checks, but she was fired that day. Super impressive when you consider that I'm in New Zealand, so getting fired is usually a month+ long process here. Whoa, I would hope that wouldn't slip by head office again. Crazy she applied to the same dang Burger King too. She actually committed fraud on some level. 1. He said, "My ex-wife died and there's no one to take care of our kids. Needed a week off to sort everything out. Ex called to talk to him. Boom." 2. One of the guys went to lunch with short hair and came back with a ponytail down to his butt. Identical twins that were sharing the job. All the guys knew and thought it was funny. Yikes. A guy was hired at the metal fab shop I was working at. He had been laid off when we were slow. He was rehired on a Friday. Started Monday. Goes and does his drug test first thing. He failed. Apparently he had celebrated being rehired over the weekend. It was funny listening to my boss say, "Are you kidding me? You knew our testing policy. You couldn't wait 3 days." I went from trained chef to welder fabricator in the last 4 years. I was amazed how prevalent drugs are in shops. Well, usually it isn't us welders using. I'm not being high and mighty here. I left kitchens because I was a fentanyl addict for years and needed to change my lifestyle. Laser operators, brake press ops or other general shop workers freaking party, dude. I had to fire a pizza delivery driver because he threatened another driver with the giant rocker knife we used to cut pizzas. His reason was the other driver was gay and he didn't like his decadent lifestyle. Describing it as decadent is the gayest part of that story. I was a florist and had a 40-something woman delivering for me. I received a call from the building manager of a brand new office building, with only one tenant, telling me my driver wrote on the elevator wall with a Sharpie. They had video showing that she was the only person to use the elevator during the time the vandalism took place. The worst part for me was, this happened a few days before Valentine's Day. The saddest was a lady that smelled like alcohol pretty frequently. I don't think she was drunk on the job. Maybe some shots done at lunch combined with sweating out a prior night. But the other members of the team started to complain about it and it was becoming disruptive. Interestingly enough, there was someone I worked with that always smelled of pickle juice. Turns out he was drunk at work the whole time and masking the smell with pickles, which works to a certain extent, but not perfect apparently. Had a food and beverage manager that brought a coffee into his female assistant manager on inventory day when the two of them would be alone performing inventory. She drank about half the coffee, started feeling dizzy and saw there was a heavy table pushed up against the door. She freaked out and got out of the area. She went to HR and they tested the coffee and it was roofied. Definitely the most interesting firing I was involved in. That's terrifying. Manager showed up drunk to an overnight shift he wasn't working and then got into a fight with 2 associates. Begged my associate manager not to tell me what happened. Didn't seem to remember there were cameras all over the store. Oh, also the other manager at another job who sexually harassed 3 different employees and got a 4th pregnant. The first 3 came forward once we began an investigation after the 4th told us about the pregnancy. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.